What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Sean Davis. Make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And we're starting a new series here on the channel. We are diving into the top 25 players currently under the age of 25 heading into this upcoming season. And I couldn't do this alone because I would have been incredibly biased and it wouldn't have been as good of a list. So I got my guy, Mohamed, with me. Mohamed does a bunch of great stuff for the NBA and the NBA draft. And, maybe we'll touch on that in a separate video. But Mohamed, my man, thanks so much for hopping out with me to do this series. And yeah, this was a ton of fun. And I can't wait to start this.
100%. Thank you so much for having me. Like you mentioned, bro, 25 under 25, that is going to be an interesting list. A lot of names on this list that made it, that didn't make it. But, that's the beauty of evaluating players. There's so much talent in the league, and you just got to appreciate all of them. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So I'm super excited, man. A lot of content in the preseason to get flowing. And yeah, it's content season, man. Let's get started.
A few things here before we get started. Number one, so we decided not to include Luka Doncic, John Morant, and Jaren Jackson Jr. I think, and also Trey. Trey is 25, but I think he'll actually be 26 before the season starts. Luka, I think, is actually still somehow like exactly 25, or maybe he's about to turn 25. But for the purposes of this series, we said, no, that's ridiculous. We're not doing it. And we also, yeah. And then same for Ja. Ja's a little bit different, but again, like super established guy. And then no Triple J. Triple J, there really wasn't a reason, just said no, not to do him. But let's start this off with some honorable mentions of ours. So we did our own separate list. We did our own separate list that kind of like added them up and see like where each player would fall in after we add our list up. So after doing our list, our major honorable mentions, and Mohamed, add any that you want to touch on. Kobe White, Devin Vassell, Scoot Henderson, Jonathan Kuminga, and Trey Murphy. Those are, if we had to like extend this list and go to 30, that would be 26 through 30 as our honorable mentions, if you will. Any like overarching like thoughts on that group of honorable mentions? And like I said, if there's any particular one that didn't make the cut for even honorable mentions that you want to touch on.
I think for me, again, I pretty much had the exact same honorable mention list. Probably, I think an extra name that I had was Jaime Jaquez. A name that I think could have made it. I think it was one of those things where maybe they just might have not started the season super hot, but they had a really great stretch at the end of the year. Was Kobe White. He was one of my main picks as a MIP for most improved. And I think when you look at the criteria of what best suits a candidate for most improved, I mean, he fits the build.
He should have won.
I mean, he essentially doubled his statistics damn near in every metric, specifically like points, rebounds, assists. His efficiency went up, obviously, given the higher usage in Chicago, but he just had an exceptional second half to the season where I think if he did have a good start to the season where, Chicago, they were dealing with a lot of injuries, kind of trying to get some gel with that team. They usually have some rough starts to the start of the season, but they had a very hot stretch to end the year off. But he was a name that I just try to find myself to add in here. But, there's the 25 names ahead of him. Either were just showing more promise, more potential, or they just, had great stretches all throughout the season and not just highlighting one point. So that was probably one of the toughest names that I had to exclude out of my top 25, either him or Jonathan Kuminga. I think Jonathan Kuminga, he's one of those players where we always knew he had the talent. It's just a matter of, does he get the role that best suits him in Golden State? He became more of a player of himself this year, and I think next year is the setup for that, where, he does get that mention in the top 25, where I probably will consider him come next season, but I think it's just a little too early for that mention, given the names ahead of him. So,
yeah. So I'm working on my like in-depth power ranking series where each team like gets their own episode and whatnot. So the Bulls at 27th, but Kobe White's film, like going back and watching that was so freaking fun. He's awesome. And he, again, if we're going off the criteria, no diss to like Tyrese Maxey, who's obviously great and will not be talked about in this episode if you needed any spoilers. But Maxey, he took a jump, but like, again, most improved, like, come on, that should have been Kobe White. Tyrese Maxey needs the, everybody predicted the breakout award. That's Tyrese Maxey.
And I think that's one of those things where the NBA has to have a caveat with the logic behind most improved. Because again, A guy like John Moran, who was a top 2 pick in his second year, won most improved, but nobody expected him to not be a good player. But I think it's the
Right.
rise from being a second year player to being a fringe MVP. That's probably his breakout happening a lot sooner than people expected, which, I mean, for a top 2 pick, that you're expecting that. But again, I think it's just the wording behind most improved. Like a guy like
Yeah.
Jalen Johnson, who that's somebody to look out for in this video. He's a perfect criteria of a player where, this guy's averaging less than 7 points, comes into this season, and he's essentially made himself a cornerstone to this team in the span of 1 year. And I literally said it in 2023, I think October. I was like, this guy's breakout is going to come this season, and that's a player to watch out for. And long and behold, it did happen. So I think it's just one of those things where you just have to kind of fine tune what you think the criteria of most improved is. I think for a guy like Tyrese Maxey, playing alongside James Harden, Joel Embiid, we knew he had the skill set. We knew he was going to be that third piece or that
It was just
complementary.
opportunity.
Exactly. And I think that's what most of these guys are. I think it's just a matter of taking and seizing the opportunity. Whereas a player that genuinely improved in all departments rather than having a higher usage or just been giving the green light, which I'm not saying that's the case for Tyrese Maxey, but I think his was more set in stone for a guy instead of like Kobe White, where, there were questions about, whether he would be, a long-term option in Chicago or he'd be the future of that team. And, he's solidified himself, at least for this season, and hopefully building the stepping stones for that for the future. So, I mean, that is a perfect way to kind of explain how we look at these kind of lists and how really tough it is that you could make a top 25 and still have damn near like a most improved caliber season. So, yeah.
So one guy that there's 2 names that I had on my personal honorable mention list. One of them actually I had in my top 25, but didn't make the cut based off how the rankings kind of worked. Guy, true honorable mention for me is Shaedon Sharpe. Please stay healthy next season. He's so good.
Oh my God. Sometimes you just look at players on certain teams and you just wish they were freed, because a guy like Shaedon Sharpe,
Get him the hell out of Portland, please.
Get him the hell out of that team into like a true contender. Because when you look at guys like Shaedon Sharpe, super athletic, a guy that can score on all 3 levels, create for himself, highly athletic. So, it's going to translate to the defensive end. I mean, for a guy that young, I mean, it's just the health, really, the availability. If he can stay healthy, he can build something in Portland with the rest of the young core. But man, he is a talent, and get that man freed, man.
So the other name, and I actually had him in my top 25, and this is actually the only guy from this like 2024 most recent NBA draft class that made my list, and I'm probably gonna get slated. I put Reed Shepherd in there because this is pure projection. I am convinced he's going to be a good NBA player. Like, I am just ready to say this guy's going to be a good NBA player. The shot's ridiculous. The shot is so ridiculous that I think we started to, like, as like a draft community, start to overthink it. And also in turns kind of like overthought the playmaking too, where if you go watch like Reed Shepherd on ball possessions where he's like playmaking and things like that, I think we kind of overthought the processing ability and the ability to make like legitimate lead guard reads. And whether or not he ever gets the opportunity is like neither here nor there, because Houston has a lot of stuff going on that they need to sort through. But I think just in terms of him as a draft prospect, we severely overthought Reed Shepherd as a player at times.
100%. And I think we've already spoke about, when it coming around the draft season, how I felt about Reed Shepherd. I mean, this was a guy that, he was the number 2 or 3 player on my final board, and basically throughout the entire second half of the season, where, I mean, this guy at 6'3", he is an otherworldly shooting prospect. I mean, for this guy to shoot basically plus 50% in damn near every statistical category for 3-point shooting, whether that's catch and shoot, off the bounce. I mean, I think he shot 47% on contested catch and shoots, where he shot 52% on unguarded contested catch and shoots, off the dribble, pull up, NBA range. I mean, this guy is an otherworldly shooting talent. But I think the people, what they get harped on is just the shooting, and they don't realize, how special that guy is as a secondary playmaker, as an on-ball defender. I think the impetus with him is that, he's a much smaller guy. He doesn't look like he's functionally athletic off initial look, but again, a guy with the highest 40 leap in the draft combine. I mean, he's just a guy that just oozes impact on the floor. And, for the short time that we watched him in the summer league, I mean, he's finding a way to get his hand in every play on both ends. And I genuinely do agree that putting him in this list is valid, because he deserves to have his name mentioned there, even if it's premature, because that's the kind of talent that he is. Given a draft class where you really didn't seem to have like an alpha guy or, a lead star that could potentially matriculate from this class. But I mean, Reed Shepherd is the build that, again, maybe it could be something where we look back in a year's time, in a 2 years time, where how did we let this guy fall to three, given a weak class, the otherworldly shooting prospect, the defensive upside, best hands in the draft, great secondary playmaking. We're going to see what he looks like in Houston alongside of those guys. But I mean, the ranking is very valid. I totally agree. I mean, hey man, he might be special.
Yeah. So I had Reed, quick side tangent. I had Reed tied for 5th on my board. I think the lowest I ever had him was like 7th, and that was when I was in my period of kind of overthinking Reed. And the highest I had Reed was like 3rd. So like between 3 and 5, I felt really confident with Reed. One last thing before we get started here at 25. So we both, myself and Mohamed, both made our own separate list, 1 through, I think we technically went up to like 30 to make sure we like cover all our bases. We then combined them, kind of like looking at like the averages of the two list and things of that nature. And at least for me, it's a weird balance of like projecting, but also like looking at them as a current player. And at least for me, I don't know about you, Mohamed, that's kind of how I came up with my list. Is like I'm completely looking at you as yourself currently, but I'm also to a very certain extent, like I am also projecting a little bit too. Did you also experience that?
100%. And I think for me, it's one of those things where you just need your fine balance of, what we were able to see on tape, within the past year, if there is tape, also trying to project that out for the future. Because again, there was a lot of injuries this season, especially in the West. Some of the guys that are on this list, from those teams, you have to kind of take that into account, guys that, maybe had small roles, lesser usage. Now you hope to anticipate the breakout, in a more serious or more healthier team. That is where you're kind of having that push and pull. And that's where we're going to agree on a lot of prospects where, you may feel that this breakout might happen a lot sooner than later. This guy, he might feel that he might take a little less dip, but you still believe in the upside if given that higher role. So it's just one of those things where, you have to take into account upside and potential versus production. And I think it's fair to have them both balanced. Maybe the same specific to who you are. For me, like you mentioned, it's one of those things where it really just depends because, some guys might project higher, but, on the tape, it might not show, but that's what you hope that they project to. But you don't want to hope too much and start expecting things that aren't there that the tape doesn't show. So it's just a fine balance.
All right, so let's get started here. Let's start things off with number 25, Deni Avdija, who ironically, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about like averaging of our two lists. We both had Deni Avdija right at 26, but because of how the list works or whatever, he got like the 25th highest average, if you will. But Deni Avdija had a breakout year 4 career season. He's entering year 5. So that's for like the year 5 and stuff like that. Those numbers are from 14.7 points, 7 rebounds, almost 4 assists, nearly a steal, half a block a game. Shot, 51, rounding up, 51, 37, 74. Shooting split, 60.1% true shooting percentage, which I want to say is like 2.5% above league average last season. League average was right around 58%, so 2% above league average. Like I said, I'm doing my in-depth preseason power ranking series, watching Portland. Portland was my number 28th ranked team. Go check out that episode if you haven't already. I was watching Deni last year, or like getting ready for my Wizards episode last year. I was watching Deni, Mom, and I said, oh man, this guy's good. He's an insane rebounder. Like, I think it's him. Weirdly, Kyle Kuzma. No, it's not Kuz. It's like him. Jason Tatum is one other wing. Like, for some reason, is escaping me right now. But he's legitimately one of the 3 best rebounding wings in the league right now. The jump shots continue to develop. Needs to clean up. Like, the playmaking's fine, but you like to see him just like clean up some of the turnovers of decision making and develop a little bit more of an in-between game, in my opinion. But where are you at with Deni?
I mean, for a guy like Deni, he's been somebody that I've been eyeing on Washington where, across the league, you look at guys where what would this player fit like on a championship team, and I think the emphasis has been on guys at the wing position where, they've been a coveted position in the league, guys that can defend multiple positions, shoot at a high level, defend very well, and do the little things right. Like you mentioned, being a meaningful passer, rebounding at a very elite level, respective to his size. But I think something that, really popped off the tape this season is the shooting. I think that's been something where in Washington, they've been really struggling to find consistent lineups that can have, multiple competent shooters at the same time. When I look at a guy like Corey Kispert, he is one of the best shooters in the league. And, when you pair that alongside with a guy like Deni, who this was his best year as a shooter, in 37% from 3-point range. He was a guy that just popped off on tape when I looked at him and saying, this is a guy that, like you mentioned, he is a chess piece that would make the best sense on a really good side. And I think given the move that he made around the draft period for Portland for a mid-first, I think it's insane value that you can get a guy like this for that cheap. And I really do like what the Blazers are building in terms of young talent. And I'm basically penciling them in as a team to look out for, hopefully in the future, if they do stay healthy and they can kind of get some continuity. But yeah, Deni, high-level 6'9", three-point shooting wing, can defend multiple positions. Like you did mention, I think he does need to clean up on, the passing aspect and, and those are things where you see, in year 5, he's taking those progressions as a lead guy on the ball. And yeah, I'm really excited for his development. Again, I've seen him bulk up this summer. So there's definitely more potential for him to grow as a scorer. But yeah, I'm super excited for a guy like Deni. I think he's going to have a great season in Portland. Respective to how they finish, it depends. That is a thing where it depends on kind of the growth on a guy like Scoot Henderson, DeAndre Ayton.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in terms of a guy that they can look to consistently to be, a good lead option there, I definitely will pencil in Deni Avdija as that guy. And yeah, luckily we have him at 25th. I think the ranking in a year's time won't do him justice for what he's about to do. Super excited for what's in store for him.
Yeah, Deni had a really great year. Post All-Star break, Deni averaged 17 points, almost 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 47% from the field, while also being on like pound for pound one of the 5 best like non-max contract deals in the league. 4-year, $55-ish million. Yeah, 4-year, $55 million. That's getting like that's regressing in money rather, declining in money. $15 million this year, $14 million next year, 13.1 in his age 26 season, which is like typically the start of their prime, and then age 27 season, $11.8 million. He's going to make 6% of the league cap, which is just stupid. Yeah, I have a tough time kind of figuring out like what's his ceiling as a player. I do, because like, okay, let's say I don't know if he's ever gonna be like a lead playmaker, but if his turnover percentage last season, if you look at like dunks and threes or whatever, it was 15% turnover percentage. Last season before that was 15.9. Can we drop that number down to like 11 and maybe get that assist percentage up to like 20? Okay, cool. The shooting stays legit. Like, what's his ceiling? I just have a hard time like answering that. So, and that's what makes him a fun player also too at the same time.
And I think for him, it's more so, I think the scoring, I think when I was reading about Deni, he shot 70.5% at the rim on about 5 field goal attempts this season. So he's a super aggressive player going to the rim, which ranks against some of the highest in the league at rim percentage numbers. And I think for a guy like him, the pathway to success, especially for him, I think for a pathway to being like a top 50 guy or at least pushing for an all-star-esque season, maybe not in the immediate year, but within the next 2 to 3 years, is that increased perimeter shooting leap and him being a consistent and aggressive player at the rim. I think the defense is going to continue to show, but like you mentioned, the passing, that's one of those things where you want to see him clean up. 5.9 assists per 100 possessions. So he's making the passes. It's just more so cleaning up on the turnovers. And again, when you look at a team like Washington, when there aren't that many great shooters, on the floor, it is tough to kind of generate expected assists or just high-level shots on that team. But, that might be the same case going to Portland. But I think for him, he understands that if he's probably going to come into a role where he's probably going to have the ball more, he probably does need to improve in that department as a playmaker. But again, meaningful passer, good shooter. I think, again, that leap is just in the scoring. If he's able to be aggressive and, consistently go downhill, I think he's going to be a menace. So I think that's my next progression that I want to see at him. If he's able to kind of complement his scoring and defense with continuous scoring, if he could push and teeter around that 17 to 18 point range, I think he can set himself up to be kind of on the back end as a top 50 player in the league. And, hopefully, like you mentioned, he's making his contract is like progressively going down and down. So it's just the value increases as the potential goes up. So again, super high potential for this guy. And I think in an increased role, he'll be able to show that and showcase it in Portland. So yeah, a lot to look forward to.
Yeah. Last thing is, I think I mentioned this in the notes here. If we can go back. Last thing, I said with Deni, want to see him like develop a more reliable in between game. Last season, he only shot 50 mid-range twos last season, shot 30% on those. He'll go to the floater every once in a while. But I think that's also like kind of that next step. I don't really care if the pull-up three game doesn't ever evolve, but like because like you said, he's such a aggressive downhill driver to where if we can get at the bare minimum, right, like that consistent in between game to supplement that, then okay, cool. You can just be that catch and shoot guy where he shot 40.5% catch and shoot threes last season. That's really what I think I'm looking for with Deni.
100%. And it was one of those things where, at the beginning of the season, he showcased that right away. I think he just had, a very great start to the season. His scoring was up, his true shooting was up, and, he was doing it on a lot better efficiency with a lot less turnovers and, more assist rate. So he is a player where he's shown that he can start that season off, and it's just a matter of just that consistency, which again, it could, fall down to, just team construction and being able to be competitive in games. But again, for a guy like Deni, there's a lot left to be desired, but that's one of those things where he has that potential and room to grow as a scorer and defender, as a playmaker. And, I think 25 is very respectable for him because I think given a new situation, he has that opportunity to kind of take that next step in all those departments. So a lot to look forward to this guy, Deni. Again, I'm one of those proprietor people that believe that him on a championship team as like your starting 3 or 4, he will move mountains for the little things that he does. And I think he's one of those players where he's not going to get the immediate buzz, but he just does so many things so well. So again, he's going to get all my gas. So yeah, I appreciate a player like him, what he does, and I'm excited for what he's going to do this season.
Number 24, Jaden McDaniels. A very, very, very intriguing player. One of my favorite, like true role players, I think, in the league. I had him as one of my top 10 breakout candidates heading into last season. It didn't quite pan out that way in terms of like true breakout, but that doesn't mean he's not like deserving to be on this list. You had him higher on your list. I'll let you kind of take the lead on this here. Yeah, I'll let you take the lead on it. So what are your thoughts about Jaden McDaniels here entering year 5?
Jaden McDaniels, again, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. A guy where coming into last season, I was looking at this Minnesota roster and I was saying, I think 2 things have to happen for Minnesota to kind of hit that next level or that next ascension of true contenders and championship level teams is I think I need to see a playmaking leap from Anthony Edwards and, being able to make defenses shift as you put pressure on the rim as a scorer. And I think a second thing that I wanted to see from Minnesota was an offensive leap from Jaden McDaniels. And it's one of those things where, again, he is a super high level defender, can guard, again, multiple positions. He is extremely versatile at 6'9" and 6'10". And it's just one of those things where I think coming into the season, he didn't have essentially the efficiency. I think he was down on basically all metrics in terms of his points, rebounds, assists, his shooting numbers. In 2022 to 2023, he shot basically just at 40% from the 3-point range, where at the season he just shot 33%. So, we've seen regression to his numbers, in his true shooting and stuff like that. But I think something that really caught my eye was the first playoff series against the Phoenix Suns, where he really showcased what I wanted to see this season, being able to create off the dribble, attacking closeouts, and being a high level finisher at the rim. And this is one of those things where Jaden McDaniels, for that little that he's shown in the playoffs, whether that was, like I said, against the Phoenix Suns and the Denver Nuggets series, he showcased that he has that potential to be a consistent sub 20 to low 20 and per point per game score on a consistent basis. Maybe not, but he has that potential where, I think he had back-to-back 22-plus point per games against the Phoenix Suns in crucial games where, the shot wasn't falling down for a guy like Anthony Edwards at times. And that's where Jaden McDaniels, again, being guarded by a guy like KD, was just taking it to him at the rim. And I think that's one of those things where, like we mentioned, projecting versus production, that's where I want to project Jaden McDaniels. If he's able to take that ball and get straight to the rim and create at a high level, and also, again, continuously being a consistent three-point shooter from the corner, he has shown that his impact will be felt on the defensive end. And I think if he can supplement that and be a high-level, at least complementary piece, whether that's from shooting from the corner, or like I said, just attacking closeouts. Again, that's one of those things where I think that is kind of the upside swing for not just him, but for Minnesota as a contender team in the West. Again, everyone's going to be coming in healthier, a lot stronger now. So if he's able to take that scoring leap and supplement that with his defense, I think that is where his true breakout is going to be, which he showcased some of that in the playoffs. And, I hope to see him riding with that momentum heading into next season.
So Jaden McDaniels, like you already mentioned, had a down year with all the advanced shooting splits. His true shooting percentage, dropped nearly 4% from regular season. Obviously, the 3-point percentage dropped, like you mentioned. His field goal percentage at the rim did improve, especially if you look per 75. Per 75 though, per 75 possession, he got to the rim a little bit less. But this is where the shooting numbers I'm actually fine with, Mohamed, because in the playoffs, his true shooting percentage took a 5% increase. He went from 57% true shooting percentage to almost 63% true shooting percentage, where you have, game 2, I think, against Phoenix, where he has 25 points. You have game 6 and 7 against Denver, where he had 21 and 23 points respectively. Game 1 of the Dallas series, we had 24. So you have these games where you're like, oh yeah, there is some offensive creation in there somewhere, even if it's to the point where I think you made, where I'm creating off of what Anthony Edwards just did, where it's okay, I'm just attacking this closeout and maybe getting a guy on my hip and getting to my spot in the mid-range area, getting all the way to the rim, knocking down that catch and shoot three. Where last season in the playoffs, using Synergy, I mean, he shot 42% on catch and shoot threes in the playoffs last season, which is nuts, right? So good finisher around the rim, pretty athletic guy around the rim, especially, right? So I'm not worried necessarily about the regular season numbers, right? I don't want to give him bail, but I do wonder at least a little bit, right? How much, because obviously he broke his hand at the end of the 23 season.
Yeah,
we don't have to discuss the reason why, but he did break his hand, legitimately. So I wonder if that affected maybe his off-season routine or anything like that. And when he was able to get back in the gym or anything like that. He likes the mid-range area, like we already discussed. Shot 121 pull-up twos last season, which I would say is fairly fine volume for the fourth option on that team offensively amongst the starting fives. Some nights the sixth option, depending on if they're feeding Rudy or what Nas has going on. So I mean, and that doesn't even touch on the defense, where his technique is so ridiculous when guarding the ball. One small, and it really is, it's just for certain matchups. You would like to see him maybe put on more muscle and weight, because that's where they really struggled in that Dallas series, where you look at a Boston, for example, they didn't struggle, because for the Dallas series for Minnesota, obviously you look at Jaden and you say, yeah, Jaden, you're one of the 5 best wing defenders on the planet, right? So here, we'll give you the Luka matchup, but he just isn't as strong to handle that Luka matchup, right? Where you go to a Boston matchup, it's oh, wait, we have Tatum, we have JB, we have Drew, who's strong. He's fine, especially with the guys we have behind him, and we can switch a bunch of stuff. But for 98% of the league, he's probably the best defender you want to guard anybody. And then you get to a very specific matchup, like a Luka, maybe another matchup here and there. You're oh yeah, we would like you to put on maybe a little bit more muscle, because then that's why they went to Ant for that Luka matchup, and it just really tired him out. So very, very, very small nitpick. Again, his technique is ridiculous. One of the best on-ball perimeter defenders in the league. They'll sometimes use him as a help defender too, where he actually has legitimate weak side rim protection ability as well. He's a awesome defender. Hopefully the offense breakout happens this season.
100%. And I think, like you did mention with him adding on to his frame. There were times that, and this might add on as well to like a gripe that I do have with him, where he is a guy that is probably not going to switch off a screen 99% of the time, but that 1% usually is, for example, in the Minnesota season against Dallas, there were times where, like, again, that game winner that Luka had where in game 2.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where you just do not want to see him get switched on to a guy like Rudy, where, again, Luka will get to his spot. I don't think there's anybody in the league that can truly stop Luka from getting to his spots. And I think with a guy like Jaden, there were times that he was deterring him from doing that. And I think the frame catching up with the defense is going to allow him to kind of maybe stop a lot of other people from getting from their spots. That's actually SGA, Luka, Jalen Brunson, these kind of low center gravity guys that are very strong upper and lower bodies. So I think that is a thing that I do want to see kind of supplement with, the offensive growth is, him filling out his frame rate. I did see some clips throughout the summer of him kind of bulking up, in some pro-am runs in Seattle. He has gotten bigger. So I think that's definitely been a point of emphasis for Minnesota where, if he can stay healthy, but also fill out his frame, there is no question that what he can do on the defensive end. And I think like as you did mention on the screen, where he does have that untapped offensive potential, there is a lot to grow for Jaden McDaniels heading into year 4. So I'm super excited for a guy like Jaden McDaniels. Again, top 5 wing defender league. I think he is probably the second best non-big defender in my eyes, behind a guy like Herb Jones, with how much, his instinct, recovery skills. And I think it's one of those things where you really got to nitpick what you value in an not off ball, but kind of a non-big defender, where a guy like Herb Jones, where I'm going to kind of give him a lot more credit because they don't actually have a rim protector in New Orleans. And he's basically the anchor as you're winning.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that I do want to see Jaden take a higher leap up, because, with Rudy Gobert, kind of increasing in his age, and, obviously that's where you start to see the production level dip. Maybe he might not be that exact same high level DPOY caliber defender, but he still would be an all NBA defender without a doubt. And I think that's where you want to see Jaden McDaniels take a leap in that aspect. And, like I said, if he's able to follow his frame, continue to be a great weak side rim protector, picking up on the defensive end on the perimeter, he's gonna just hit another level. And I'm super excited for that. Like you said, he doesn't have to be a lead scoring option. He probably won't even end up being a top 3 or top 4 scoring option for Minnesota this season. Who knows? But I think for him showing up when it mattered most is good. Being able to do that on a consistent basis is what we want to see. So again, I'm not going to overrate or underrate the regular season that he had, but again, I'm really holding on to what he did in the playoffs, and I'm hoping that if he's able to even give me a smidge of that in the regular season, then without a doubt, I think the potential could be endless. So I'm super excited.
Next player we had pretty similarly ranked. Like I think I had him 24th. You had him 23rd. So we're right on with this next player. Number 23, Jalen Suggs, who had a breakout year 3, to say the least, right? And I'm so freaking happy he had a good year 3 because I loved him. Watch him in college at Gonzaga. Obviously, you have that very memorable, Final Four buzzer beater against UCLA, one of the best college basketball games I've ever watched. He is, I mean, man, where do we start with Jalen Suggs? So there's some notes I didn't put on here, but I think where to start with Jalen Suggs is he is a ridiculous defensive playmaker. Like let's just start there. Defensively, he's nuts. He plays with a ton of energy. And he's one of the reasons why I am so high on this Magic team heading into this upcoming season. The shot really came around last season. Finally, he is a good playmaker. He doesn't get a ton of opportunities because of kind of how like Orlando runs their system. It's a bit weird, but he is, when he gets those opportunities too, he is a good playmaker, decent enough of a driver. Shot 60.3% true shooting percentage, 2% or so above league average, 12.6 points, 3.1 rebounds, nearly 3 assists, 1.4 steals, 0.6 blocks. I mean, yeah, he's fun. Mohamed, where are you with Jalen Suggs?
I think the biggest thing that we really have to give credit to Jalen Suggs for is the shooting leap that he had. In the first 2 seasons that he was in the NBA, he shot 27% from the 3-point line. Yeah. And this season, he shot a ridiculous 40% clip. from the 3-point range, ultimately making it an all-defensive NBA team as well. I think he's cemented himself, not just in this core, but amongst one of the elites in terms of backcourt defenders, and just havoc records on the defensive end. I think this guy is able to consistently create defensive events. He's able to abuse guards with his strength, and it's just his positioning. I think his hands are so good, and I don't think
they're crazy.
It's insane and he's always in the right place at the right time. And again, he's a guy where he'll dance right through a screen. He'll be able to just show up one time and be, on the weak side. He just makes winning plays, and he's super impactful. And I think the metrics show for that. And he's basically the type of kind of energy guy that you want that elevates your team. And again, this is an Orlando team that is steadily growing to be, one of the scarier young teams in the league. Obviously this team being strong held by, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero. I think it's important that we mention Jalen Suggs in that conversation. Maybe not on the offensive end, but again, a guy that is such an elite defensive playmaker. And again, this is a guy that was one of the highest ranked football players as a quarterback in the country. So he has a high level reading of the game. And it obviously shows on the offensive end and also on the defensive end as well, where, he just makes the right plays and he's super impactful. And I think, again, 98th percentile in defensive box plus minus. I mean, he's just a guy that has his hands in every single play. And again, being in the 98th percentile, being better than 98% of all NBA players, again, he's far from perfect, but he has made his impact extremely felt. And again, pairing that defensive upside with the 3-point leap that he's taken is one of the most, underrated storylines that I've came out from this season. But again, if this is just kind of the start of what to look forward to for Jalen Suggs, again, I think this Orlando team, which, I think they oversold themselves in the playoffs. Again, great first run, but I think they just fell a little short. And again, that's where, age shows. I think heading into next season with, a lot stronger roster, being able to draft with a guy like Tristan DeSilva, where they're going to add another wing that can shoot another high level, adding a really great shooter in KCP. This team is just adding on more defensive and 3-point shooting depth. That is 100% one of my breakout teams to look for, not just as in him, but as a whole in the East and in the entirety of the NBA. And he's going to be one of those people that are going to be at the forefront of that conversation. So again, fantastic defender. I think that leap as a shooter does not get mentioned enough. And again, credit to him as a player. He's a special guy, man.
I'm starting to think that I'm just like a closet Magic fan. I already have the signed Paulo jersey hung up behind me, and I've contemplated getting a Jalen Suggs one. So yeah, I just think I'm a closet Magic fan. Some numbers for you. Jalen Suggs is in the 88th percentile per B-ball index in deflections per 75 possessions. His hands, his instincts and IQ on the defensive end is just absurd. And then using like dunks and threes, he was in the 91st percentile. Hold on, my bad. Okay. Amongst all guards, he was in the 91st percentile for steals per 75 possessions. 85th percentile for blocks per 75 possessions. So again, like the defensive playmaking, which I think there are players, and I'm sure we could like think of a few of them. There are guys defensively that are good defensive playmakers that are like awful like defenders. Like the first guy, like LaMelo, is actually a good defensive playmaker where he'll get steals in the passing lanes, etc. But like we all know that LaMelo Ball is a god awful defender, and we'll get to LaMelo later. But like Jalen Suggs is all. If you let's say Jalen Suggs next season, putting back up just his regular counting numbers. Let's say he averaged 0.7 steals and like 0.3 blocks. So essentially, has cut his defensive like playmaking numbers in half. Okay, that will obviously impact it 100%, right? Because we're going from being like a insane playmaker to being still, fine, right? But like not a guy that's a big steals guy anymore.
Yeah.
But he'd still be like in terms of like technique, one-on-one isolation ability, guarding ball screens, or his like screen navigation is absurd. And also you pair that next to KCP, that's gonna give teams in the Eastern Conference nightmares. He'd still be one of like the top 12, top 10 like on ball defenders in the league. So that just says something about Jalen Suggs. The shooting, you hope it, and I think it is like here to stay. He's continued like the confidence or whatever, like you said, like go back and watch like year one Jalen Suggs. Ew. Like we have made a massive turnaround since then. You even look at like post All-Star break, Jalen Suggs, 13 points on 52.7% shooting, nearly 43% from deep, 3.4 assists, 1.5 turnovers. I mean, honestly, offensively, with Jalen Suggs is I don't know if like increased volume is the answer, but like to see more of the playmaking. I think that's where like I like to see the volume to increase there. Where okay, cool, let's give him like more opportunities to be that creator for and set up like Paolo for easier buckets. And I think they will give him the opportunity this season as he's gonna be like the real point guard, and they're not gonna play him in a lineup next to like a Cole or Markel isn't there anymore. But like I think they're really gonna give him that opportunity, at least at the start of the season, to run the show and set things up for Franz and Paolo. And they'll let Franz be like a point wing too. So Suggs is awesome.
He is really good. And I think something that I think we kind of took away was that, given the shooting, I think, and again, in the playoffs, it was one of those things where he might have regressed as a shooter, shooting 29% from 3-point in the playoffs. We know what
Game 6 though.
Yeah, he stepped up when it mattered most, and again, it's one of those things where credit to him that he's taking that leap as a shooter. When I'm just looking at these stats, in 22, being able to shoot 33% from 3-point on 2 attempts a game, very similar in 23, shooting 50% on efficient field goal percentage on the same about attempts, 2.3 as well, but in 24, 61% on effective field goal percentage on nearly 4 attempts a game. I mean, the confidence is showing, and it's obviously matriculating in the stats. So he is a guy where, again, if he can complement that shooting leap again with the budding creation flashes, I'm really starting to buy stock in this Orlando team. I'm just trying to imagine a 5 lineup with him, KCP, Paolo, Jonathan Isaac, Franz. It is a lot.
Orlando's gonna be good.
That is gonna be a very freaky team.
That's the best defensive. Let me backtrack. That's one of like the 3 best defensive lineups that any team can put out on the floor.
And I think
go ahead.
They're all young. They're all growing as a core, and it's one of those things where if I had to put my money on a massive leap on a team just growing, I mean, Orlando's right there, man. I mean, when you have 2 stars in Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero, who we'll mention later on in this list, these are guys where you have 3 Magic players that we consider in the top 25 of players under 25. I mean, this is literally a legit core. Again, this is not a gimmick. I don't think these guys made it to the playoffs in the first round by luck. I think these guys, they're a serious defensive team. They're one of the top 5 defensive units for pretty much the majority of the season. I think some injuries, obviously, with the guys like Wendell Carter, but obviously a guy like Goga Bitadze, he stepped up big, in Wendell Carter's absence. Jonathan Isaac being able to come back healthy, still showing flashes of, minutes and not playing consistently enough. But again, when these guys are fully healthy and they're all locked in, this is, I think, a top 5 defensive unit that probably people don't acknowledge that it is. But again, this is a serious team to watch out for heading into next season. And yeah, it's a lot of scary development that's left on the table for a guy like Jalen Suggs, where if this is just a start, if he's able to create more and be, like you said, even if the numbers as a defensive playmaker dip, if he's able to still supplement that with higher offensive creation, and as well, we can see to get as well with guys like Franz and Paolo, there is a world where these guys could, make a deep playoff run, and, we should watch out for it, potential second round team. Who knows? But this is a team to genuinely look out for and genuinely have stock in, with some of the best young players in the league. And he is one to mention in that sentence. So, yeah.
So I have one thing with Jalen Suggs. He's entering a contract year this season, 24-25, last year of his rookie deal. I am curious to see what they do. I'm assuming that he is like fully a part of their long-term like goals and plans. But I'm curious because Orlando at some point can be like a victim of like the new CBA where they just play Franz. Paolo's gonna come up soon, like after Jalen Suggs. Like you're gonna have to, in the back of your mind, feel like, oh man, we're like, let's say Paolo like takes an all NBA jump this year or whatever. Like we really have to pay Paolo. So I begin to wonder, what do they do with Jalen Suggs? Again, I think they want to keep him around because like just the defensive backcourt of Jalen Suggs and KCP is like ridiculous. But again, in the back of my head, I do worry about that, especially for Orlando. Now, Indiana did something similar, but Andrew Nembhard was not like a top 10 pick. He was a second round pick who had a ridiculous playoff run. It'll be interesting to see.
And I think with a team like Orlando heading into the 24-25 season, I think their cap space situation is something they got to question. I mean, you're going to pay a guy like Isaac $25 million a year. You're paying KCP right now 22, Cole Anthony 12. There's going to be some guys that are definitely going to be due to get paid. And I think they're also going to fall victim to kind of the same thing that we're probably going to see soon from the OKC Thunder, where you have a lot of young guys that are, hitting the right metrics very soon into their career. And again, when you have all these guys that are kind of hitting the same trajectory, all as a young core, someone's going to have to get hit in that team in terms of the cap space. And I think the way that this team is looking, they're probably trying to build that two-man step with Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero. So again, it is one of those things to kind of watch out for with a guy like Jalen Suggs, where on this season, you're going to be paying him $9 million. So it's still going to be extreme value for him. But again, in due time, he will have to get a pay increase, and he's definitely going to see that contract. So it's one of those things where, definitely teams are going to have to monitor him. I think teams were definitely looking at his situation last summer. And obviously he had the year that he had, and he took a massive leap. And I think there's still room for him to grow. So it's one of those things where, does Orlando get on that early and try to secure their future with those three? And again, they have a lot of young guys and a lot of young contracts. I think when I look at a contract splurge like KCP, it really took me back saying this team really doesn't spend a lot, but they're going to spend a lot with the young guys they do have. So one of those things where if they do want to maintain their defensive core and kind of the makeup of their team, how are they going to be able to supplement that without, wanting to hit the second apron? So one of those things where we got to see how it pans out. But I think, again, they may fall victim to how the league does it with these young core teams that are all building at the same point, a lot of young stars in the making. And again, somebody has to get hit without having to take the financial burden of that. And I think Orlando might be a victim of that. But who knows? We're going to see with the contract situations how they start with a guy like Jonathan Isaac, how they can retain him, KCP if they do restructure his contract in the future. But, in the immediate moment, probably not something to think about, but it is kind of scary to think about if, these guys that we do want to take leaps end up taking leaps. So,
Now, and I don't want to undermine Jalen Suggs, but there was one team that could probably get away with it. It would be Orlando, because they have Anthony Black just sitting there. And I loved Anthony Black in the 2023 draft cycle. So if there's one team that could potentially get away with it, it would maybe be Orlando. But we shall see. Number 22, freshly paid Andrew Nembhard. Just first off, what a ridiculous playoff run. And as you see here, one of the first things I said was, legit playoff riser. I was looking at his per 75 numbers earlier, Mohamed. If you look at Andrew Nembhard's per 75 numbers, you look at the playoffs, you look at the regular season. I'm going to really quickly pull it back up now. In the regular season, per 75 or whatever, right? Regular season, 13.2 points, 5.9 assists, 2.1 turnovers. This is all per 75 possessions, like I mentioned. 57.1% true shooting percentage. He took 2.9 field goal attempts at the rim, 4.5 field goal attempts from the mid-range, 3.6 field goal attempts from three. Those are all regular season numbers, right? In the playoffs. 17.9 points. So we're talking nearly a 5-point increase. 65.5% true shooting percentage in the playoffs. 6.7 assists, 1.6 turnovers. So the assists went up and the turnovers went down in the playoffs. Took more field goal attempts at the rim, nearly one attempt more per 75 possessions at the rim. Took 5 attempts from the mid-range. The efficiency barely dropped off. Shot 50.5% from the regular season in the mid-range, 48.6% in the playoffs. And then 4.2 threes, and he just shot the shit out of the ball in the playoffs from three. 48.3% from three in the playoffs. What a run from Andrew Nembhard.
I think the craziest thing to think about is This was supposed to be Benedict Mathurin, right? This was supposed to be the guy that This was supposed to be the guy that was supposed to be your complementary piece to a guy like Halliburton, where if you look at a guy like Nembhard, I think he's actually the perfect piece next to him. Again, high level decision maker, on ball creation ability. Obviously, in that Boston series, he showed you the scoring upside that he can against one of the best defensive teams in the league.
Game 3 and Game 4 was ridiculous.
He quite literally put this team on his back and even made it a game when, again, took it to overtime in Game 1, was very clutch in that game. Game 3 to 4 turnaround, he was just making shit happen. And I think with a guy like Nembhard consistently creating advantages on the perimeter, using his leverage, I'm just looking at this guy cook in the mid-range, and it's just I look at him in the same way that I look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and he uses his leverage and deceleration to kind of just get to the rim and create mid-range shots. And it's just so beautiful to see. And if we're watching this, again, he did this on low usage, low minutes. And that playoff was really where we kind of got to see probably his true form of him having the ball in his hands on good usage. Again, 14 points, actually 15 points, averaging in the playoffs, higher from a 9-point average on the playoffs to the regular season. So he definitely took a major increase, not just in his role, but just in his minutes and his expectation. And I think this year 3 leap is genuinely going to be special. And again, in Indy, they were able to find a way to lock him down. Recently, this past week, they just got a deal done with TJ McConnell. So it really seems like they're just running it back with this team. And they understand that, when healthy, if we're able to find a guy that can complement Halliburton, they already have a good, rotation with him and Miles Turner. Again, something that I also do want to mention, a guy like Jarace Walker. He's a guy that wasn't featured as much.
Yeah.
He's so good, but he just hasn't been featured. And again, it's one of those things where with the emergence of Obi Toppin, it just kind of got redundant with a guy like Jarace Walker to get minutes, at least early on, for Rick Carlisle, where he's probably not as reluctant to give young players opportunities. And we've seen that in the past with him. But something that I really want to see featured is Jarace Walker more in this team. I think he offers such a unique skill set as a big, where he basically is a do-it-all big, extremely fluid, extremely defensive-oriented. He's a guy that can score, shoot the ball. And it's just so interesting to see this Indy team a year ago compared to now, where they have such a unique mold of just multi-positional guards. Again, looking at the writing on the wall, I think this definitely makes it look bad for a guy like Benedict Mathurin, where, heading into a year where he probably is going to want to have to ball out unless he doesn't want to see himself not see a second contract in Indy. Halliburton and Nembhard are definitely going to be one of the at least premier duos in a backcourt heading into this season. And I'm super excited. I think with him, we're harping on the offensive potential. I think the two-way ability that he showed in the playoffs, again, I'm not saying he is exactly this player, but he has that Derek White mold where he's still being extremely impactful as an off-ball defender, still having good on-ball reps, super impactful. And again, he's a guy where not just on the offensive end, but also on the defensive end, he's able to make playmaking abilities. So again, him, Siakam, Halliburton, Miles Turner, Obi Toppin, this is a really, really legit core heading into the East, where, again, when you mention teams in the East, if it's not Boston, if it's not New York, I mean, they're right there. They're right there with teams like them and Philly. This is a serious team who basically coasted the whole year. And I would say maybe post All-Star game break, they really were not healthy as a core. Again, Halliburton, exceptional start to the season.
Hamstring.
And then he had that hamstring injury, after the in-season tournament. And, he just wasn't able to kind of hit those marks as a scorer. As a playmaker, he still was good and fantastic, but and as a playmaker, but he just did not hit that same level as a scorer. And, having a guy like Nembhard where he can supplement that with you. And again, they made that midseason acquisition. They moved off of a guy like Buddy Hield. You would think, where would that shooting come from now? Benedict Mathurin out for the rest of the season. Who is going to step up as this lead guy next alongside Halliburton? And it seems that they found their guy. And, for a guy that got paid this summer, I really think it's a steal. Again, 3 years, $59 million. He's getting paid just barely under $20 million a year. That is a legit steal. And again, it's a well-deserved deal for a guy like Nembhard. And I'm super excited for the leap that he's going to take. I think we're going to look back at this contract, not even just, his rookie contract, him being a second rounder. This new extension that he got, I think this is going to be one of the best value contracts in the league. It might be premature. We might be talking too ahead of ourselves, and he might have, shined in the moment. But again, I think this is one of my best bets for a player to kind of break out into full ascension next year as one of the up and coming young stars in the league. And I think Nembhard is going to be in that conversation. I'm super excited to see what this Indy team does, man. I think they have a lot of young guys. They just drafted very well. I think with a guy like Johnny Furphy, another great shooting wing. I think that's the end point of emphasis for that Indy team, adding a lot of multi-positional wings and backcourt players that can shoot at a high level and defend. I mean, we've seen a guy like Ben Shepherd, take a very big leap, which was kind of surprising. The guy at the back end of the draft that they drafted was the guy that was featured more than their top 8 pick. But again, that's where you want to see. They have a lot of young talents. How are they going to be able to get them kind of included? But at least for what they got going on right now, a team to watch out for seriously in the East. That's probably going to make some serious noise.
One of the most ridiculously talented, just like mid-range, like in between game operators in the league. Regular season and playoffs combined per energy shot 52.9% on mid-range pull-up jumpers, which is again ridiculous. Then you combine the floater, like he'll go to it 41% on the floater, took over 70 attempts, good finisher at the rim, nice craftiness around the rim. And it's just like truly because like they have one of the 3 best playmakers on the planet in Tyrese Halliburton that we kind of forget that, oh, you have this other guy too that's not that level of a playmaker, but he's a really damn good playmaker in his own right. Like you mentioned, I think he is a really, really good fit because of the defensive chops as well, where, okay, we're facing, a team we're facing the Atlanta Hawks, first team that came to my mind. Facing the Atlanta Hawks, okay, cool. Who gets to Trae Young? Because I'm out. Andrew Nembhard. We don't have to worry about like Hallie. We can hide Hallie a little bit more defensively. And knowing that like Nembhard will at least hold his ground. We have Miles Turner, Aaron Nesmith, who's also really, really good too. So we have options essentially, right? So good, really, really good off-ball threat. Bob scenario shot 48.2% regular season and playoffs on uncontested catch-and-shoot threes. So he is for all these reasons a really, really nice fit next to Hallie. One thing when like talking about his upside, and I mean, I don't want to say I don't know if we can get to this point because I mean he took a shit ton of mid-range pull-ups last season. I would like him to like display a little bit more confidence and willingness, like shoot more threes off the dribble, because I think that would just help kind of his self-creation back a little bit more, and then you can really like see a little bit more of the upside as an offensive player. Because even in the playoffs, right, if you go look at like some of his playoff numbers, he took 10 pull-up threes in 17 games, in 17 playoff games. So now again, still shot the hell out of the ball from 3, like in the playoffs. Shot 48.3% from 3, like we mentioned, but 50 of those 63s were on catch and shoot opportunities, right? So can we see just a little bit more of a volume on the pull up from 3? And that's probably the biggest thing I would say from Nembhard, because he's a good finisher, he's a good playmaker, ridiculous in between game. It's like I said, just a pull up 3 and like opportunity, I guess. Like, do we ever get an extended version of the playoffs minus Hallie? And the answer to that question might just be flat out no. And to a certain extent, that's like that's all right, I guess. But if we're just talking about like pure upside, that's what it would take, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I think it's one of those things where he did show that he could handle that workload in the absence of Hallie. And now that you know that you do have that, that probably just opens up the floor a lot more. Again, when you look at a guy like him, Hallie, TJ McConnell, Pascal Siakam, these guys have a really, really good, I think just looking at just those 4 and just as a team as in general, an assist to turnover ratio, just as a team. I mean, these are guys that are elite playmakers in their own right, respective to their positions. So this is probably the best assisted ratio team in the league. And it's led by those 4 guys. And harping back onto your point about, something that I do want to see with Andrew Nembhard is the volume as a shooter. Again, he was able to create like a plentiful opportunities at the mid-range, plentiful at the rim too. He shot 74.5% at the rim. So, I mean, he's scoring at a stupid level inside the perimeter. I think if he can supplement that, beyond the arc. And again, one of those things where he shot 20 for 42 in the entire playoffs from 3-point, just at the top of the arc, 4 from 6 from the right, left corner, 5 from 12 from the right. It's one of those things where he has that volume. Respective to the mid-range, at the rim, he's creating a lot of opportunities, getting to the line. Again, he's a really good guy that is applying a lot of pressure at the rim, getting to the free throw line. We showed some of that, in the playoffs. Is he able to supplement that with 3-point shooting and really be a true 3-level scorer? again, this is a guy where he's a strong on-ball player, off-ball player, playmaking, shooting, great defender. He has great feel with or without the ball. So it's just a matter of if he can make himself available as a shooter with the ball in his hands, because we do know what we can provide as a catch and shoot guy. And I think that's why I'm super excited about him and Hallie as a duo, more so than Benedict Mathurin, because I think having a guy like Nembhard who has really great on-ball creation and playmaking chops, that is going to allow Halliburton to maintain more of an off-ball role and not have so much emphasis on him.
And kind of low manage a little bit more to like in game.
Exactly. And I think with Halliburton, he's a really good catch and shoot shooter. For what we give him his respect given to his, his wonky shot, he is a really good shooter. And I think having him in off-ball opportunities is probably just going to open up the floor for this team more, where Halliburton doesn't have to initiate everything offensively, and he doesn't have to be this guy that creates everything from something. And you can see where in the beginning of the season, a lot of teams didn't know how to anticipate this team, super high-paced, highest-paced team in the league. If you're able to have another guy that you can pair alongside Halliburton that can just set the tone and play at his own pace, but at the same time kind of dictate play and not force so much of that on Halliburton and kind of tire him out, that is where I think they get their scariest. And I think that's where him pairing next to Halliburton is what makes this duo so much more scarier. And again, they're still going to have a guy like Nesmith and Benedict Mathurin off the bench, TJ McConnell. I think this is a super underrated second unit where this team could just put out a similar great playmaker out on the floor, similar like defender out on the floor, and they're not going to see a drop in play. So that's why I think they put themselves in that upper tier in the East, where you have a team like Boston and New York, where these are teams where they don't have to have their lead guys in for them to make something shake on the floor. So again, this Indy team, if they continue to be healthy, if they continue to gain more continuity, extremely scary team. I think a team that is able to keep its main core and still be the fastest paced team in the league. If you're just adding more shooting, higher level defending to your team and retaining your core pieces, I mean, the sky's the limit for this team. I mean, who knows what they can achieve? But I mean, if Eastern Conference is like their first real true lick at what this team can achieve without, their number one guy being truly healthy throughout this entire run, who knows, man? I think that is their expectation. And I think it's not too hard to say that they could run it back. Obviously it's gonna be a tough matchup versus a team like Boston. If they do get an earlier matchup versus a team like New York, maybe Philly's in that conversation. But again, this is a team where you have to give them the respect. People were saying they're just all offense, no defense, but when it mattered most, they locked in. Obviously, unfortunately, they did lose to Boston, but that is a team that showed you that they could hang. They didn't make these games look out blowouts like the way that it seemed. They were in these games neck and neck with Boston.
Except game 2, where like Hallie just went down in the middle of the game, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's nice."
Again, it literally took individual brilliance from a team like Boston, where that's where they're showing you that they're just better than the rest in the East. But again, going into overtime in game 1 because of a lucky Jalen Brown shot. Game 3 and 4, again, individual brilliance from a guy like Andrew Nembhard that literally took it to the wire. Again, it's just one of those things where this team is right at the hump. Can they get over the next step? And that's where you want to see guys, like a Halliburton, take that leap and be more healthy, or hopefully a guy like Miles Turner continue to impact the floor on both ends. This team is a scary limit, man.
Number 21 is, by the way, I can't. But number 21 in this series is a guy that we both had at number 21. Feel really, really good about this guy. Number 21, Dereck Lively. A guy that is such a, talk about perfect fits. Like his fit next to Luka is kind of insane. And the fact that he isn't a great floor spacer, even though I do think he's working on it. And that was the big, fake. I don't want to. I'm gonna stop that take. But anyway, that was something that all the draft analysts we kind of hyped up about. With the workouts or whatever. It's the equivalent of believing Ben Simmons 3-point shots. All right, too far. But we did bring that up, and I do think he's working on it. But he supplements the fact that he isn't a shooting threat yet by flashing, especially the playoffs, legitimate short roll playmaking ability. Where even if the Mavericks didn't immediately score off of this, and you're a Mavericks fan, so you could absolutely correct me if I say anything wrong. He would at least be able to make the necessary read that puts the defense in a rotation, and now they get a high quality shot. So I want to say it was the OKC series, because OKC was playing a lot more aggressive. they would maybe show with Chet or hedge or switch it and basically just collapse on him by just using Lively and those pick and roll actions. And he has the short roll playmaking ability that Gapper didn't have at times. That really opened the play. It wasn't that. It was Minnesota. I'm trying to remember what series it was.
I think it was the back end of the playoffs where OKC we did start to see, because that was where we did see a lot of the hack of Lively. Again, he is a guy who's making a lot of those open ball reads and PNRs, and he was making those reads again. Guys like PJ Washington in the wing, Derrick Jones Jr. on the wing on the corner. I think something that I'm super excited when I talk about a guy like Dereck Lively is his progression that he's made from high school, college to now. I think when looking at this guy heading into his freshman season at Duke, again, this was the #1 big in his class. He was arguably the #1 player in his class heading into his season, in his senior season, going into Duke. Again, a guy super, super upside potential, but he just was not healthy throughout his freshman season at Duke. And I think that was a major gripe for him heading into the draft cycle where, is this guy going to be able to be healthy? Is he going to be able to create for himself? Obviously, we do know what he can do around the rim. He is a special kind of lob threat and kind of just interior presence. Again, an elite rim protector, and again, just a rim deterrent. And that's where, again, those two things that showed on tape as well at the NBA level, and especially throughout the playoffs. Again, a guy that he was able to create high-level shots at the rim, supplemented and being activated from a guy like Kyrie and Luka. These were guys that were able to create shots for him, and he was able to show his high-level touch around the rim. Obviously, we didn't see that one shot in the corner in the finals from 3-point, which we'll just have to call a spade a spade. It is fake, but him showing you that he does have that floor spacing ability, for me, it wasn't a surprise because, obviously on the workout tape, it was there. It's just a matter of opportunity to present itself. Yeah. And I think that's one of those big things where with a lot of big men, does the opportunity present itself for the flow of the offense? Does he find himself in the corner? And I think with the way that him and Luka have their dynamic set up, again, when I seen that we drafted Dereck Lively, I was extremely excited. Obviously, you do have that concern with the injuries, but given a full health guy, if you pair this guy alongside Luka, you will have one of the best PNR tandems in the league. And that was apparent all throughout the season, all throughout the playoffs. Again, in the Minnesota series, shooting 16 for 16 in terms of just entirety of these series. He showed that he is not just a highly efficient offensive player, but just effective. With, like you did mention, on the short roll, being able to make the right read. Again, something that I was concerned with him heading to the playoffs was, if he does get put on that line and they do the hack of Lively, is he going to be effective? I think as each series progressed, you did see leaps. In the Minnesota series, that was one thing where I did see, probably his biggest leap, as a free throw shooter, shooting, sub 70%. I think in the entirety of the playoffs, shooting 60 or 59%. So I think that's definitely something that we want to see increase. But I think with a guy like Dereck Lively, I genuinely think he could enter himself as one of the best young big men in the league. With his potential. Again, a guy where I think if he's able to improve his touch outside of the rim and just kind of open himself up, again, just a little floater, mid-range shot, it would literally move mountains for this team. Where, again, when he does get that ball around that free throw line area, he's able to make the right read. He's super aggressive when he's at the rim. I think also, like when you're watching that Clippers series, he's a guy where he's super patient defensively, but again, if he's able to put that muscle and be able to improve his frame, I was watching a guy like, Zubac basically turn him out and just be aggressive at him. And I think that's something where, he's able to be in foul trouble. And again, he's a super young guy, first-year player in the league, being a high-level contributor onto a quite literal NBA finalist team. He needed to make himself be very available, and he did. And I think that's one of those things where coming into next season, you definitely want to see him improve on his offensive touch. But again, high-level offensive player, high-level defensive player. I think with him, he's a player that's probably going to be a very important cornerstone for this Dallas team. And, as long as you still have a guy like Luka and Kyrie there, he's going to make his impact and be known on the offensive end. And again, super, super exciting player. I really love him. And I think 21, actually not even 21, 23 does not even give him the best shout of where I truly feel about this guy. Again, one of my favorite players, not just on the team, but just in the league, again, for a breakout for this upcoming season. So super excited, man, to watch him.
So Dereck Lively, and he is such a, like you said, just fun, unique, like defensive player. I think Jason Kidd is going to be able to just continue to find creative ways to utilize him. Has, I think, the lateral quickness and foot speed to like guard out on the perimeter legitimately as well, which is useful in a scenario where, like, if we're trying to hide Luka, for example, right, and a team might try to switch on, well, cool, like we can you can use some really, really creative stuff defensively, like keep hiding Luka. And Dereck Lively does what I think a lot of bigs, especially recently, that come out, a lot of bigs struggle with as defensive anchors is like one of my biggest pet peeves, especially if you're a drop big. And it's where you don't like protect you. Okay, so as a drop big, right? For I've explained this a few times, but if you're new and don't know like how drop works, the goal of drop. This is why you would ideally want to have a good like screen navigator, because you want to keep it as 2-on-2 as possible, right? You can essentially stay home everywhere else, keep the action 2-on-2, and etc. But let's say you have a bad screen navigator, then it's now the big's responsibility in a drop to step up at least a little bit to like not allow like a free lane to the basket, right? Or like an easy pull up mid-range jumper or whatever it is, depending on where the ball screen's taking place at. But also you have to recognize like there is a guy rolling behind you, right? And that's where a lot of times like teams will like implement tags on the weak side or whatever. Dereck Lively does already at 20 does such a good job at like playing both and realizing, hey, like there is also a 7-foot giant rolling behind me that I have to be worried about. But like I also still have to at least show myself and be aware and be able to move in the mid-range area or whatever to like not allow a wide open pull-up. I think he does it really, really well. I think Chet's just like a defensive unicorn. And if it wasn't for like Victor Wembanyama, that guy exists, like Chet would have ran away with Depoy. I mean, not Depoy, Rookie of the Year. Obviously AD's nuts at it. Bam's ridiculous. And maybe it's like, I just watched Jalen Duren tape like a week ago or so, and like watching him defensively and then watching like Dereck Lively defensively, two guys that came up, similarly. Duren came out a year before. So it's just like such a breath of fresh air going from that to
players on the defensive end.
No activity from Duren, like no awareness as they drop big, to great awareness, could improve, but great awareness already as a 20-year-old, active in the passing lanes, legitimately really good rebounder. I mean, was in the 95th percentile in terms of like a blocks per 75 possessions. He had 2.2 blocks per 75 possessions during the regular season. Dereck Lively, he is awesome. And I think, for Dallas to keep like making strides as a team, can Dereck Lively be like one of the 5 to 7 best defensive bigs like in year 2? Is that crazy to like ask that question? But he's fun. And I think we're going to look back at this list next year and say, maybe Dereck Lively being at 21 is a bit too low.
Yeah. And again, I think we genuinely forget that this guy was a rookie. Like this, he didn't take 1 step forward, 2 steps forward, 3 steps forward, I feel. And I think it's just crazy that, this guy he broke a record in the playoffs with the highest plus minus of any rookie. I think he beat Ginobili's record with Spurs. But again, this is a guy where he is impactful wherever he plays. Again, this was a guy that he didn't even start consistently for this team, but he was basically playing starter minutes and was a major contributor where, a guy like Daniel Gafford, where again, effective lob threat, just was deficient in some areas defensively on the rebounding end. And that's where a guy like Dereck Lively stepped up big and throughout the playoffs, super impactful. Like you do see that 73.1 true shooting percentage. I mean, this is a guy that is just, he makes his shots and he is effective on that end. And again, it's one of those things where if this is the start, what does year 2 look like for Dereck Lively? How can he if he improves his touch, develops, a shot in the restricted area, a floater, something like that, what does he look like? Like, what does that leap look like? I can't comprehend it. And I think that conversation that he could, be in that conversation for, a top 10 defensive big anchor question, I think that is without a doubt the potential. And I think that's one of those things where you have to have that consideration. I mean, he showed you throughout the playoffs where, again, there aren't really high-level defenders or a true POA defender on Dallas, especially now, with the departure of Derrick Jones Jr. They really miss out on a true POA. Obviously, they pick up a guy like Najee Marshall, very high-level defender in his own right, but he's not the same level as a POA defender as Derrick Jones Jr. was. So again, a team where they really don't have a very set defensive core, which is actually surprising because this was the best rated defensive team post trade deadline. And again, I think for the kind of crap that we give Luka as a defender, Kyrie at times, these are guys that, when they are locked in and they're tuned in defensively, they can make an impact. And it's good
Especially
to know that.
Kyrie. Kyrie's actually like a pretty underrated defender.
100%. And I think people don't mention that enough when watching the OKC series, especially, and the Minnesota one as well.
Especially
Kyrie,
OKC.
he was holding his own. There was times where, obviously Shea is orchestrating everything. There were times where, he's able to guard a guy like Dort, Jalen Williams. He is holding his own and also creating events and playmaking ability on the defensive end, creating a lot of steal opportunities, lanes. He was being effective. And it's a good thing to know that if they do get the front line passed in Dallas, that they do have an anchor on the back end like Dereck Lively to hold it down. And that's one of those things where, I think the pairing of him and Najee Marshall are going to be a really fun duo to watch. I think with Najee Marshall, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, super underrated. And for a contract that they got in $9 million a year annual value, that is going to be a fun duo to watch. Actually pairing a real defender that, again, in New Orleans, he was a guy that was involved on every level, high level defender, super good with his hands. I think if you pair a guy like that in front of a Dereck Lively, I mean, you're going to have a lot of havoc records on that defensive end for Dallas. And I think Jason Kidd's going to be able to see that and make it be very effective in getting those two and utilizing them best. So I'm super excited for this Dallas team. I think in a year one true rebuild where, again, not just a year ago, this team didn't make the playoffs, drafted this guy, Dereck Lively, at 11, and long and behold, they found their future big for the future. So again, a lot to look forward to, and I'm super excited for what this team look like. Obviously, they do stay healthy. Sky's the limit, man.
Number 20. Number 20. We have 3 more to go. Really quick, because I forgot this question at the beginning, and it just pondered on me. Mm-hmm. What were some guys on the overall list as a whole that you really, really struggled finding their spot?
Okay, this is one of those things where there was a lot of guys that I would pair them next to each other and look at them and say, where can I put this guy at? I think for the earlier part, it was for example, a guy like Keegan Murray. This is one of those guys where I seen what he did last year, right? They have this acquisition of DeMar DeRozan. Where do I rank this guy in terms of potential? Whereas the production showed a lot on tape. How can I project him out where he's probably going to have a decreased role, decreased impact? That's something that was really difficult to kind of impact. The guy that we're about to speak about right now at 20, that was a person that was really hard to rank because at his highs, he deserves to be.
It's ridiculous.
He deserves to be a top 5, top 10 mentioned player. But, the thing is that it's always not that case. He's not always on the high. And there's, for the majority of the season, he's not there. So, that's somebody where can I give the respect to the player and imagine him at their peak, but then also be real with myself and say, this is not the same consistent production that I get, March, April stat boosts aren't the same as, the 6-7 months prior to that. So that's a really tough thing to mention. I think Chet, we both spoke about this. Where would we put a guy like Chet, irrespective to, a guy like Wemby, Evan Mobley? Where do we rank guys like this? That was a super tough ranking to have because, again, I think because of the emergence of Wemby, it's hard to, not for me or you, but I think just as a general public, it's hard to give Chet his flowers when there's a guy that's the same age as him doing a lot more, a lot better, where we tend to just forget the kind of impact that Chet had on this team where, again, they were a 10th ranked team the year before his injury, and he comes in and they're the best team in the West. And man, his impact was extremely felt alongside SGA. And it's one of those things where that this guy being in this team makes them he's the engine that keeps them going. So again, that was another ranking that was tough. Again, Zion.
I had a ridiculously hard time figuring out what to do with Zion.
I think those
another guy that when he's healthy and dog, I still that play-in game against the Lakers before he got hurt, ironically, was, excuse my language, fucking ridiculous from Zion.
I think, was it 40 points in 3 quarters?
40 in 3 quarters. And mind you, the Lakers have, in my opinion, the best defensive player on the planet, and it didn't matter. He was unstoppable. So I had a ridiculously hard time ranking him. I didn't really know what to do with LaMelo. And that is like largely due to health. I think I really struggle with the guys where, okay, are you healthy? Those are the ones like LaMelo. I think it's not going to be in this episode, but I think when we get to LaMelo, Hornet fans are going to be buzzing. See what I did there? But no, like seriously, I think Hornet fans are going to be pissed based off where we have LaMelo at. But it's like, it's a health thing. Dude played 133 games these past 3 seasons. Like, that's barely 50%. Like, I can't justify putting him in my top 10.
I think it's just tough because, again, we've seen the glimpse of LaMelo when he was healthy and he carried that Hornets team into a playoff run. And again, I think I'm still harping on like this is what he could do. And obviously he's grown as a scorer, as a playmaker.
Deserves the contract.
Again, and that's the hardest part. Like, a guy that deserves that contract, a guy that deserves to be praised in that sense, is availability your best ability. And I find it hard to, like, I don't like using availability as a skill because, again, you're there or you're not. You could still be available and do nothing, you know?
Yeah.
But when he is there, he is so impactful. He is so good. He is one of the best young PGs in the league. I have him in that tier of, really elite young guys, but he just does not play enough for my liking. And I think when he does play, it's just tough because, again, the construction of this roster of the Hornets.
He said offensive like coaching from the 90s with Steve Clifford for like these past like 2 years.
Oh, they're playing back with talent like him, and obviously with the hire of Charles Lee. Again,
I like the hire. Yeah,
I really do like that. I think a super analytics guy. I don't like the draft pick that they had with Tajin Saloon. So
yeah,
I'm gonna slow my roll with how I feel about the Hornets until we get to LaMelo's episode. But again, it's one of those things where you have a gem of a player in LaMelo, but he just is not healthy. And I think it's one of those things where at some point you just have to be real with yourself and say, if this player just cannot be healthy, you just have to cut your losses. And it's a shame to say that because, again, I look at Zion in that same respect where, coming into each season, we talk about how he's gotten leaner. I think genuinely this season this offseason, he's actually gotten slimmer. And,
so like those pictures are legit, right? Like,
yeah, those are very legit.
He looks like
he looks different, but again, I just don't know. Like
it looks like an AI render.
But I see a picture for this Jordan brand. They were in China and it was him.
Yeah.
I'm like, this guy actually looks like leaner.
Yeah, but it's like him, Luka, JT, and isn't it a fourth one?
No, there's definitely a fourth Jordan athlete. I can't remember.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why it's not like dawning on me either. It's a young player too, so like that's why it's weird.
I can't remember. I think Paolo.
That's who it was. Yeah, Paolo. Yeah. I forgot Paolo's Jordan. Also, I kind of a weird time thing because I like actually like Paolo, but I also kind of have a weird time sorting where Paolo ranked.
I have that same thing too with him and Franz Wagner. I think I had this question posed where, can you be the best player on your team but not be the most impactful player? And I think I have that issue with him and Franz. I think there's times where Franz could be more impactful than Paolo, but Paolo's the clear better player. And I'm only having this thought process after the Euros the FIBA, where we've seen Franz just carry his Germany team and basically show what he could do as a lead scoring option, as a playmaker, as a defender. I was raising that question where I was like, could you be the best player on your team but not be impactful? And, obviously for the most part of the season, it was Paolo for both those answers. And, obviously in the playoffs, 1 for 15 shooting in game 7 from a guy like Franz Wagner. It's tough to have those kind of conversations with him when that's literally the last memory that we do have him respective to the NBA season. But
yeah,
he bounced back plentiful in FIBA. And it's one of those things where it's like Franz Wagner playing well is good for this team. Obviously, Paolo is going to do his thing, but I think he helps him more than the other way around because Franz, again, to me, I feel he's the X factor for where this team can go. I think if he's able to consistently shoot, and that's something that we're going to mention plenty when it comes to his part in the ranking. He's a player where if he's able to be a lot more consistent as a shooter, I think that's where another leap for this team can emerge. I think we know that Paolo, he can have that All-NBA leap next season, and I would not be surprised in the slightest. But it's really Franz. I think Franz, can he show you that he's that consistent secondary and complementary piece to a guy like Paolo where, Suggs is going to be that defender. He's going to be able to be a good shooter. They're always going to have a great defensive unit. Can he just stay out of trouble as a fouler and just be effective. So that was one ranking that I had hard with those two.
I have a question because I actually started thinking about your internal question about can you be the best player but be the least not be the most impactful?
Yeah.
Who's the best player on the Miami Heat right now?
I see Bam Adebayo.
Okay. So that answers my question then, because then if you said Jimmy, then that would have been the one scenario I'm like, okay, yes. Then the answer is yes. I think Bam is easily the most impactful. The playmaking, the deep, he's a top 5 defender on the planet. The shots developing. Jimmy, when he's going, he's different. He's the best player.
I think this season was just a knock on Jimmy Butler because he just was not healthy. But generally speaking, he is the best player on Miami.
Yeah, generally speaking.
He is the best player on Miami, but he's not the most impactful.
But that's a very special situation.
Yeah. And again, there is not many scenarios like that in the league where your best player is not your most impactful, because how does that happen? How are they the best then?
Yeah.
And it could just be you have another player that's next to him that is just as impactful. But it's one of those things where, specific to the Miami example, where Bam is literally their defense. He is their anchor. He's their everything.
He's their POA. He's their wing stopper. He
is the team. He is Miami. And I was reading, I literally wrote a mini thread about this, about how when it comes to actual defenders that do everything for their team, why is Bam not mentioned in the elite of elite conversations? And I'm like, this guy does everything for your team when it comes to on and off. So again, this guy,
I think it's honestly because he's just not this insane shot blocker, and he's a big, and that's where
stats,
yes,
so forth, but his impact is so felt that, again, when he is on the court, in terms of interior and perimeter defending combination, they are a top 5 team efficiency wise, defensive rating, stuff like that. When he is off the floor, they are ranked 27th. They're for the Miami Heat. And I wrote about this, I think, last week, where, again, is this team, this is a guy that is everything to their defensive side. Again, he was one of those people where I said he deserves so much more love, from screen switching, closing out, cutting off drives. Obviously, the guy, an elite post defender, recovering, great on the glass.
Here.
He has made his impact inherent as a defensive anchor. So
Bam is so elite defensively, and it's not. I'm not not saying this to say they don't have any other capable defenders, but Bam is so elite defensively. Combined with Spo, in my power ranking series, I have defensive rankings as well, and not to partially spoil. Well, I guess I am. Bam and Spo combined are so elite that I have them as ranked in my tier 2 of defenses between 4th and 7th.
And again, when you look at that,
that's
team,
Bam and Spo.
those two, again, with the loss of Jimmy Butler throughout the season. And again, when you look at that team, take Bam out that equation. What are they
take Bam out of that equation, and they're legitimately 26. They're in my tier 7, 26 to 30. That defense is awful. If you take Bam off that team,
he orchestrates everything, and I think
replace him with your average anchor defensive big. So I don't know who's whoever the 20th best drop coverage big is in the league, put him on this team instead of Bam, and this team is a bottom 5 defense.
This team does not even sniff a winning record or playoff hoops. And it's one of those things where I'm looking at this Bam guy. I mean,
this Bam guy.
The problem with Bam is just that he does not have the stats that match up to other anchors, so that's why he's not held in that same respect. But again, when you look at a guy like Bam, he doesn't see that same amount of volume as rim attempts as other guys, because he's doing the work inside and he's not getting met at the rim as much as these other people. That was that conversation I was having with somebody about Rudy Gobert and him. Rudy Gobert gets tested a lot at the rim, and for successful reasons, obviously he's going to come out with a lot more blocks, a lot more better rim deterrent stats. But a guy like Bam, he does not have the stats oftentimes to show for it. And I was reading a stat where I read Miami allows the fewest rim attempts in the league, and it's actually 4.3% fewer when he's on the floor. So whatever their average is, when he's on the floor, he makes it a lot worse for teams and actually generating paint pressure and just touches in general.
Again, Bam and Spo. It's
he is there, but those two are the entire backbone of Miami. Those two get punished for having to be the backbone of that team and not having the blocks and steals to show for it. Yeah. And it's really just a numbers game. But again, when you can look at this guy and the kind of half-court defense that he can offer you in Miami, it's crazy, man. But yeah, that is definitely a respect to that question where can he be the most impactful player but not the best player? And again, all healthy, Jimmy Butler's the best. But again,
Yeah.
there's not much of those kind of conversations in the league. And that's something that I have with Franz and Paolo, where it may not be apparent now, but maybe into the season where we actually get to see those two gel together, that'll be something interesting to see. So, yeah, that was one of those questions where when ranking these kind of guys, I'm having those things where this guy should be higher for where he's at, but, either semantics on the team, role-based issues, does this guy, should he be ranked higher than, a similar like player? That's where, obviously with the restriction of ages, I was looking at a guy like, Trey Murphy and Deni Avdija.
Yeah.
And
Trey, honorable mention.
I was taking age, maybe that restriction where, if they're born in 2005 and being 25 on the dot, those were one of those things where I was saying, these guys are so similar statistically, everything, archetypes. That's where it's like hard to like just nitpick what's the best. And again, it's one of those conversations where production over potential. You have to have your fair balance of the two. And yeah, it's super tough, man. And that's what makes these lists so fun, because it's cutthroat. But again, I might have my reasoning for why I have XYZ higher than this guy, and you may have your reason, but that's the beauty of this debate, that you can feel that way. A lot of people that are fans of these guys might have them higher ranked or lower ranked. So that's what's fun about evaluation. We can talk all we want, but these guys will have to tighten their jock straps and play when it matters most. And we'll look at this list a year later, and we'll probably laugh at some of these rankings, and we'll probably say we weren't wrong on these rankings. We're just early. So who knows?
And again, if there's any list, any part of this list that you're like, yeah, like Sean, you're in India, or Mohamed, there's no way you have this guy ranked right here. Let us know in the comment section below. But let's proceed with this list. Number 20, who I did a film breakdown on after one of his most recent, like, ridiculous stretches. Number 20, Jalen Green, who, if you just simply look at that month of March, there is no way you can tell me you do not see an all-star. And again, one of the more weird players to rank. I think I actually like had him lower on my list than you. If I look here, I think I had him 23rd on my list. I think you had him 21. If I like scramble to find the list real quick. I had him. No, you had him 19th. You had him 19th. I had him 23rd. So he ultimately lands up here at 20th. All right, here's the month of March for Jalen Green. I almost said Jalen Suggs. So if you look from his February 29th game to March 31st, so a 16 game sample size. Jalen Green averaged 28.1 points, 6.2 rebounds, 3.8 assists, a little bit over a steal a game, shooting 48% on 21 attempts per game, 40.9% from three, average 5 free throw attempts as well, shot nearly 79% from the line. And this month, because again, like I said, I remember doing a film breakdown, and I remember watching, I want to say it was that OKC game right around this same time frame. I think they won in overtime. I don't necessarily recall SGA playing this game, but I remember watching this game and saying, like, yes, like this is what we've kind of been waiting on from Jalen Green, where it started to click. It was like, oh man, like this guy is, we obviously knew, freak athlete with the ball in his hands, right? The quick twitch speed, the jumping, like the vertical pop that he has is ridiculous. Post All-Star break in general, 23 points, 44% from the field, got more volume, 18.5 shot attempts, nearly 37% from deep on more on higher volume. The biggest things is obviously just improving the decision making, more consistent, and just flat out better defensive effort at times. But I was pretty critical, for example, of them paying Fred VanVleet all that goddamn money like 2 years ago or 2 off seasons ago. But it could actually like kind of pay out for them, where you pay Fred all that money to essentially come in and be this mentor next to Jalen Green, to where their contracts actually line up to where you can like feasibly let Fred VanVleet walk this upcoming summer and say, here's all that money we paid you here. Okay, cool. We got you for these 2 years. Cool. You can walk now. Jalen Green's entering a contract season. And I think it's the efficiency. I think it's the decision-making at times as a playmaker, because there's times as a playmaker where you see the ability to create and make reads. But the decision making sometimes is off. His true shooting percentage was 54.4%. Let's throw the graphic back up here, which would be almost 4% below league average. Like I said, league average true shooting percentage was 58%. So it's really efficiency. It's like can that all-star post all-star break like stretch from Jalen Green be real? Like pre all-star break, he shot 31% from three. So and I don't want to say like consistency because like that can also like kind of come off as lazy, but like truthfully, it's just like, dog, can we just be more consistent as a player? He's for sure like not going to be a one and done contract wise in the league. Like whether it's here in Houston or somewhere else, he's going to get paid. 100%. Whether or not it's like a rookie max deal or not, who knows? And that's where like this year 4 really, really matters. But at the end of the day, he's only 22 and he's like barely 22 if I recall correctly. He turned 22 in February, but still,
he's like, a young, and I think again he's so young, and I think we have that criticism for him. Again, when I'm looking at this March, and this is just the PR that's with Jalen Green, where that March literally revived his stock. Again, 27.6 points per game, basically 50% from the field goal, 40% from the three on 9.5 attempts a game. Again, 61.3 true shooting percentage. That March was special. And again, he led the Houston Rockets to a 13-2 record without arguably their best player in Alfred Şengün, who we'll mention as well in this list. But again, for a guy to do that without his lead option next to him, the question bears is if Houston can just get a close like approximation of this level, this specific Jalen Green, they will 100% be playing playoff basketball next year. And again, it's funny because I don't know if you've seen on this TL within the last like 2 to 3 weeks, these Rocket and OKC arguments that people have been having where, people are very cognizant that like Jalen Green, this is what we're entering year 4, year 5. He's been doing this in the spring all the time. He always has these 15 to 20 game stretches where he's just the best basketball player on the earth. But, he just has such a slow start to the season for the last 4 years. But the thing is, you harp on what he could be when he is confident and when he's firing on all cylinders. And I think with the Ime Udoka hiring, he's able to get the most out of him. And as you mentioned, like I said, ridiculous month of March. That's where he literally put everything together. Obviously, my question was, he's doing this without Şengün. So heading into the next year, is he going to be able to do this alongside him? And as you mentioned, it being a contract year, it's one of those things where one of those two are going to get the rookie max, right? One of those two guys are going to be their main guy for the future. And they're both vying for that. And it's not to say that Jalen Green doesn't have a future in Houston. It's more so just to say that like he probably has the easier path at doing so. He's just making it a lot harder for himself in terms of, like you mentioned, the decision-making, the efficiency, being able to just put everything together for basically like the resume of a season, right? And again, you see this team last 4 years, basically post-Harden departure, they have not made the playoffs, but steadily after steadily, they've been improving in their team. Obviously, they've been improving in their win-loss department. Just this past year, I think they went 41-41.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so they were just 500. And so clearly in 2 previous rebuild years, they've shown that they've taken strides up and up. And there's just also other guys that needed to step up, Jabari Smith, other guys in that mention.
They have a lot of decisions to make. They have a lot of decisions to make between like Jalen and Jabari and Tari and Şengün and Cam Whitmore, who I adored in last year's draft cycle. Just drafted Reed. Like they have at least 6 guys. Amin Thompson, like they have 7 like rookie contract players. Like, yeah, they have a lot of guys here.
And I think one of those things that's like crazy to think about, like you did, their core 7 to 8 players are all within the same like relative range of age. Yeah. So it's crazy
except
to think
Fred and like Dylan Brooks, except those 2. Like everybody else that like will play are like could qualify for this list essentially.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you mentioned about the Fred point, they don't have to stronghold themselves to his contract because they have a similar-esque player in Reed Shepherd who, again, have another great shooting talent that's going to be able to give you defensive impact and also playmaking potential. that's one of those things where, you're going to use this Fred VanVleet year to kind of mentor those guys and Jalen Green, Reed Shepherd, take them on their wing, but also still be that veteran presence that they do need as a guard. Again, it's one of those things where if you can basically grow the flowers and the seeds for this season, can we see those kind of increases in Jalen Green's game where can he take a leap as a playmaker? Can he be a lot smarter on the ball and, tighten his handle, be able to kind of manipulate the defense? Because again, I don't think anybody's arguing that he's a freak talent as an athlete. He's a guy that can jump with the greatest of all of them. He's a guy that can get to the rim at ease, shoot the ball at a high clip. It's just more so, is he able to just garner that confidence and be able to do that over a long stretch of the season? And again, one of those things where this is really the true first season that we got to see this Rockets team gel together under a coach in Ime. And again, obviously that team, that March, it's crazy to think that without their best player that they went 13-2 and they beat some very competitive teams in that run. So it's one of those things where they're showing you that they can hang in the West. And, do you want that Jalen Green to rise to come to where if he does have that rise, they can become a playoff team 100%. If they have contributors like Amen Thompson, where if he can take a shooting leap, obviously he's a special type of wing defender. He just is a gadget of a player, right? And then now you add, in their third pick of Reed Shepherd, this team adds legit shooting to their team, where I think that was something that I'm going to give the Rockets a pass for, and where there was a lot of lineups that Jalen Green was playing in where there was probably two shooters at best, and the second shooter being like, I'm actually giving them respect in that sense, but in terms of competent shooters, there's not many of them in their wing department. And it's one of those things where coming into the season, that's something where if they can improve on their shooting, and Jalen Green, again, just improving as a player and taking that leap, more so being a lead option. I think he's one of those things where that dynamic between him and Sengun is just a very interesting one. Because again, I personally think Sengun is the lead option on that team, but for what his skill set offers, it should be Jalen Green that takes the lead at times. And it's just one of those things where, again, confidence in how they mesh is super important. Can we see a world where Jalen Green and Sengun can both coexist and both be 22 to 23 point per game scores or more? That's the world that we want to see. And I think if they can achieve that, they are without a doubt like a low-end playing team, potentially a playoff team in the West. Again, everybody's getting healthier, everybody's getting stronger. What can the Rockets do to separate themselves from the pack of, New Orleans or an LA or, teams in that range where those two teams that I mentioned in LA and New Orleans are a lot more set in their teams. They know their roles, they know their guys. They don't really have questions with their lead options, maybe to New Orleans in terms of health for Zion. But the point holds that if the Rockets if we can see this same level of Jalen Green, I have no doubt that this team could be a successful team throughout the season and, potentially win upwards to 45 to 50 games this season if they all can stay healthy. That's how crazy the West is. They could win 45 to 50 and be on the literal back end of playoff basketball, as a seventh, eighth, maybe as a play-in team. So not only does that show how competitive the West is, but that just shows you what is expected of the Rockets for them to even be in that conversation. And it requires Jalen Green to be at the forefront of it. So again, a lot of expectation for Jalen Green heading into year 4 and 5. It's just one of those things where we have these same conversations every year. When is it going to change? And I think this is the year that is the real year, because again, like you said, heading into a contract year, there are decisions to be made in that front office. And again, I don't know if they have the patience to keep waiting for this Jalen Green true breakout into superstar potential to come out. Again, that March showed me that he could be there. This upcoming season is going to be the final test for that. So again, I think the ranking for where we have him is respective to what he's done in the past, but with his potential, he could 100% be a top 10 player in this list. I have no fear that he could be. It's just a matter of, can he put pen to paper and actually produce? So yeah, really that's where we're at. So
all right, number 18. Wait, no. I keep doing it. It's number 19. Number 19. One Mr. Keegan Murray. Who last season the volume went up, year 2, sophomore season, averaged 15 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1 steal, little less than a block per game. Shot 45% from the field, 35%, 35.8%, from 3, 83% from the line, 56.9% true shooting percentage, so about a percent or so below league average. And he took a massive step up defensively. I don't think he was like a bad defender, but he went from being like a
Legit.
fine one. Like he went from being fine to like being like he is a legit like perimeter defender. He can really hold his own against opposing wings in one-on-one isolation, even in the post at times as well. Ball's great. It doesn't matter. And then obviously you already know that he is a dynamic as hell shooting threat. And honestly, like the shooting numbers going down one, I mean, I think that for a couple of reasons. I think there's a few different things to look at. I think number one, it does have to deal with just the volume going up. And sometimes you do like see the numbers drop. But I also think like the degree of difficulty, a lot of the shots he was taking, like and some of the attention he was getting. And Mike Brown can really utilize him in some really fun ways with their offense. They run a lot of like Princeton concepts, and they'll run like some of the elbow splits and things of that nature. But Keegan Murray has those games every once in a while where you still see like that lead wing in him, where like he can be like your number 2 option offensively. I think of the Warriors play-in game where he had 32 points on 10 of 20 shooting and shot the lights out of the ball, 8 of 13 shooting from 3, had 9 rebounds as well. He'll even have like some games as a playmaker where he could get like 4 or 5 assists, and that's definitely still more of an underdeveloped part of his game. He had multiple 30-point games throughout the regular season, had a 33-point game in a loss against the Heat earlier in the season back in January, had a 32-point game in a blowout win against the Pistons, had, I would imagine his career up to this point, 47 points in a December blowout win over the Jazz. So, like, he has these games where the shooting is, like, it is still insane. Dynamic off-screen threat. One thing that I would like actually like want him to do a little bit more, and maybe, we actually kind of saw teams like Team USA did it a lot with like LeBron and Steph. Weird comp, I know, but like you could do some like 4-1 ball screens with like Keegan and De'Aaron Fox, like allow Keegan to maybe play against the mismatch a little bit more, which we saw a lot at Iowa. And I guess like that's truly the biggest thing with Keegan. It's in terms of his offensive ceiling, because like the shot I'm not worried about at the end of the day, even though it was a down year in terms of shooting, comparatively speaking, to year one. Like, do we get more sub creation opportunities in there? Because last season, if we're looking at his play type data, 31% of his scoring possessions came on spot ups. The next 21% came on transition attempts. The next 21% came on dribble handoffs. And then the next 7% is on cuts. Next 5 is on off screen. So that is like literally almost 80% of his, scoring possessions came off ball. So and that's where I think you might have touched on this a little bit earlier with like how weird it is kind of ranking Keegan, because you do go get DeMar DeRozan. So I'm saying all this stuff about how, hey, look, his offensive ceiling or whatever is like, can we find him more on ball touches? But like then you go get DeMar DeRozan, and that almost seemingly they're going to play a lot through Sabonis. De'Aaron Fox is still probably their best offensive player. Depends on how you really feel about Sabonis. So
as well, another off-ball shooter, off-ball creator as well. So I think
it's tough.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where you've seen clips of Mike Brown just really like get on Keegan's behind about, I need you to be aggressive. Like obviously not just with the shooting, but just in terms of letting the game come to you versus you taking it to the game and being aggressive as a scorer. Like I said, in that play-in game, 21.5 average in 2 games. I think the thing that stands out the most, again, 50% from the 3-point in the play-in tournament, 62% true shooting. I mean, when he's on fire, he is on fire. Like you mentioned, dynamic outside scoring threat and shooting threat as well. When he is hot, he is hot. And I think something that we need to remember with this guy is that he is probably a 4th or 3rd option on most nights, and sometimes maybe a 5th, who knows. But this guy is a player that is maybe a consistent 3 to 4 option, but he has the potential to just grow into a second lead option given his skill set. And I think something that is important is that, like you said, with the shooting numbers going down, we definitely see an increase in terms of usage and minutes. Obviously, the points increase. Every basic statistical category outside of the shooting took differences, but one thing that remains is that Keegan is growing as a wing, especially as a defensive one. And that's like, as you mentioned, he took a very quiet, legit leap as a defender in 23 and 24. Again, a 6'8" guy, 6'11" wingspan. He is very versatile in terms of his position. He can hang with guards, he can play with wings, he can even guard some bigs. But through and through, he is a high-level defender, a team defender at that. Again, he has shown some potentials where he could be a good weak side rim protector. Obviously he's a good rebounder at his size, but like as a two-way player, being a young one at that as well, I have no doubt that this guy can be an elite wing at one point in his career. It's really more so does the opportunity present itself. And I think that's why I did mention the DeMar DeRozan acquisition, because again, the big thing about his offense is that I want to see more of it on the ball. Can he create more off the dribble? As you mentioned with like the screening things, we know how much of impactful he is as an off-ball shooter, one dribble pull-ups and DHOs. As you did mention, this guy has such an elite range as a shooter. What can he do to supplement that in terms of his creation? And I think picking up a guy like DeMar DeRozan, where I'm trying to imagine a game in the fourth quarter where who's going to touch the ball between DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, De'Aaron Fox. Again, that's probably where we're going to have to see a dip in Keegan Murray's production in terms of shooting. He's probably going to take a leap actually in shooting in terms of off-ball numbers, but his on-ball creation is probably going to take a hit when it's probably the year that you do want to see him take that leap.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things where, again, the team gets stronger, but Keegan Murray as a player probably diminishes in terms of his usage, his role, but it's not going to be too much to where, he's going to become not as effective as he was in year one or year two. He's still going to be a very elite gravity player in terms of his shooting on the perimeter. He can still attack closeouts very well. It's just a matter of does the opportunity present itself. And I think heading into the season, again, when we do these production versus potential tipping of the scale, I think I'm weighing a lot more on the production here than potential, because when I'm looking into this next season, I don't see much potential for him to grow in terms of an on-ball creator given the makeup of this team. But just as a whole, I think him taking that leap as a creator, a self-creator at that, and just also finding ways to get to the rim, as you mentioned, a guy that can score at the mid-range with ease from the three-point. It's really just, his touch around the rim that I have some question about. Again, with the numbers that he's had as a cutter, he can be an effective option around the rim, the restricted area, developing a floater off of, being able to pump and pass through shooting. Those are things where his playmaking and getting to the rim go hand in hand, where if he's able to attack a closeout and, manipulate the defense with a pass, that's the next level, or basically the next step in his game that he can level up in. So again, I think with Keegan Murray, there is so much to like, because again, I think this is a wings league. And we've seen so much where wings are able to shoot, defend multiple positions, and just be super effective on the defensive end. Those are guys that have a mainstay in this league. And those are guys that get paid the most. Those are the guys that are the best in the league. And I think Keegan Murray being a player that, again, in year two, super effective on a team where, they did miss out on the playoffs, but he was a major reason as to the success in their play-in run. But again, heading into this year, they're probably going to be a team with playoff aspirations, serious ones at that. But again, a team that doesn't have a legit POA defender in their starting five, he's probably going to have to be tasked with a lot more defensive responsibilities heading into the season. So that's definitely something that I'm going to be excited for. I think his defensive leap that he took this past season is probably going to be overshadowed by the one he takes this season, given the nature of their roster. Again, having a guy like Malik Monk, I don't even know when he's going to come off the bench. Again, we're still forgetting about a guy like Kevin Huerter. It's going to be tough.
Kevin Huerter, Keon Ellis, who they might consider like for like roster, flexibility and like
Devin Carter with
balance. Devin Carter. They have some guys.
They have some guys, and I think it's going to be also fun to just see like what that rotation is going to look like. Not just as a shooting team, but defensively as well. I think there's a lot of defensive potential where you really don't look at Sabonis as this elite defender or this rim protector anchor guy, but I think in terms of their backcourt and wing play, there's a lot to like in terms of their defense. So again, Keegan Murray, a lot that I want to see hopefully in this upcoming season. But it's really just, does the opportunity present itself for him to do that? I personally don't think it does, and that's where probably his hit and his numbers do. But for the ranking that he has, I know how special of a player that he can be, which is why I gave him that respect of that number. So I don't know if you feel the same way, where he probably does take a dip in those numbers, but I still respect how good of a player he is.
Yeah.
And he can be when it matters most. So
yeah, like if Keegan this year averaged 15 points, that number drops to 12, it would not surprise me. So
yeah, the shooting numbers take an increase, I probably would not be surprised as well.
I
Because
wouldn't be surprised either.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just gonna be because like the DeMar DeRozan acquisition. I would almost bet on him getting back to that 40% clip from distance. Like I said, I'm not worried at all about the shot. Number 18 is a guy that I forget if I like said that I had a tough time ranking him, but I did. And it's because he's so actually like already established, and it's a miracle he's somehow still like under 25 and qualifies for this list.
Yeah.
But number 18, Darius Garland. Like I said, entering year 6, had a very, up and down. I think it's like being nice and, not really even like stating the whole situation, how last season went for him in Cleveland.
Yeah.
To the point where like it got to a situation this summer where like Cleveland and Darius Garland's camp, I think he's with Clutch, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he is Clutch.
So like they kind of have this back and forth where the Cavs kind of call his bluff on wanting him to be traded or wanting to be traded and whatnot. But former All-Star, has some of the best handles like in stuff creation in the game. Is ridiculous. Great playmaker. But like we talked about going all the way back to a Jalen Green, how like Jalen Green's month of March just like completely rehabbed his value as a player.
Yeah.
Darius Garland's value is like completely in the gutter right now.
Yeah.
And it's really the fit. And it's actually why I'm a little bit confused, and also at the same time, like not looking forward. Like we're being brutally honest, I'm not looking forward to talking about the Cavs in my power ranking series because I'm flat out confused, like why they don't want to trade Darius Garland. Because I'm just at the point for like Darius Garland's sake, for the Cavs' sake, like for their team ceiling, where I kind of want there to be a separation, like how the media was just clamoring for Tatum and Jaylen Brown to separate. Like, that's how we need to be with, like, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Now, Darius Garland, like I said, a really, really weird season. The fracture broken. I mean, whichever one, I'm going with here. His jaw earlier in the season, I want to say back in November, if I recall correctly. It was pretty earlier on in the season. Yeah. And who knows how much that really affected him, not to, like, give bail or whatever, but, like, that's a pretty significant injury. I would say so. It was back in December, actually. He missed like the last couple of weeks of December, and he didn't return until January 31st against the Detroit Pistons. That was his first game back from that injury. When he's healthy, the playmaking, like I said, is legit. Like there'll be like weird stretches where he'll have like actual turnover issues. Like the month of November, average 4 turnovers a game to only 6 assists a game. Whereas you go later in the season to like February, almost 7 assists per game to 2.3 turnovers a game. So it'll just have these like random spurts throughout the season. Or he'll even have like straight like Philly late in the season, 12 assists, 3 turnovers. So I guess the consistency with like the decision making and things like that. Even in that Boston series, like he was at times like you saw the flashes again. Like game 4 wasn't like particularly efficient necessarily, but like I mean he was their offense in that game 4, 30 points, 7 assists. A really, 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 really good driver as well. Per B-Ball Index, 17.5 drives per 75 possessions, which is in the 98th percentile. Loves to create his own shot around the basket. The shooting, he's a good shooter. And him and Donovan Mitchell can really stretch the floor with their shooting. I don't know. It's just a weird conversation. And I don't know what they do necessarily with Darius Garland, who, making $36 million. I want to say this isn't the first year. I think last year was the first year of his extension. But he's now second year of a 5-year, $197 million contract, which they had to pay him. But again, I'm kind of at a point where it's, where do we just kind of cut our ties here? He's a good player. He's a former All-Star. And I think it's very feasible, whether it's here or it's elsewhere, that you can get back to that level. I haven't sold my stock necessarily on Darius Garland, but he is a kind of a tough eval right now because of all the negative stuff that surrounded him last season, the trade request this summer, how low his value is amongst the media and fans alike, and I think even the league to a certain extent too. So I don't know. He was a tough time. Did you have a tough time kind of ranking Darius Garland?
100%. I think with a guy like Darius Garland at his peak, how good he is as a player. But obviously, like you mentioned, this season was a really much of a roller coaster with him. Again, pre-fracture, he was on form, but I think post-fracture, we've seen him just drop levels. And I think the problem with him, and again, this is something that even around draft time, a lot of his name was just getting buzzed around in trade rumors, trade mills about, should they actually focus on this 20th pick at picking a guard, and a guy like Bub Carrington, who was getting mocked in that range to them, where, they were ready to move off of a guy like him, a guy like Jarrett Allen, potentially Evan Mobley, because they do understand that Donovan Mitchell he really doesn't have the patience to stay there and wait till, the going gets tough and, it gets better. I think for him, the Cavs are very aware of how good of a talent he is. I mean, we see it in this playoff. He was literally 1v5 out there at times. And it's one of those things where is Darius Garland the kind of player that you can pair alongside another ball-dominant scoring guard? And this is not the first time we've seen this. When it used to be Darius Garland and Colin Sexton, we had the exact same issue that, does Darius Garland gel next to a guy that needs the ball in his hands as well, that really can't play off ball as much? But with Darius Garland, he has a lot to like in his game, like you mentioned. Great playmaker. He's one of the best pull-up shooters in the league, from three, from mid-range. He is really good, especially super crafty player at getting to the rim as well, and just creating.
Loves the floater.
He is so crafty, and I really like watching his game. He's very good on the eye in terms of how he plays. Again, a guy that scored 18, from what he plays, he could easily be a 20-point per game scorer, but you could just tell that injury really weighed on him. And, in previous seasons, it's one of those things where, you've had some concerns with his injury. In his first 2 years in the league, 19 and 20, he only played 50 games in the season, but 21, 22, that's where he played 68, 69 games a season. So, it's been kind of not a concern, but, health has been in question at times with a guy like Darius Garland, where, as you mentioned, his stock is at his lowest that it's ever been. Some of the discussions that I hear about Darius Garland and the kind of conversations that they throw him in terms of players that they compare him to, start bench sells, he should not be in these conversations. As a guy that's a former All-Star, elite option in Cleveland, I don't understand why we overthink it with a guy like him, but it's very justified as to why. I think he's stuck at this level where, he could be a better shooter, he could be a better scorer, he could be, improving in terms of his decision making, in terms of his, cleaning up on turnovers, improving his assist to turnover ratio. There's so much could have and should haves with a guy like Darius, and that there's not many definitives with him that you have those kind of question marks. Why he might get thrown into trade rumors. But I think one thing's for certain, this Cleveland team, I think at its current moment, are not title contenders in the slightest. And I don't think this team is a team that's probably seriously fighting for anything at the way that it's currently set up. Again, Donovan Mitchell, a special shooting guard talent, one of the 3 best shooting guards in the league, no debate. But again, having a guy like him, Evan Mobley, one of the better rim protectors in the league, and one of the better talents in the league, which again, another player that's under 25 that we'll mention on this list to look out for. He is another player where I also have questions for Evan Mobley too. Who is the true second guy in Cleveland? And you look at, should it be Darius Garland? Should it be Evan Mobley? There's times where Darius Garland has basically gone through 2 different sets of teams in Cleveland, and he still hasn't kind of taken that breakout leap that, maybe we've seen in a guy like Tyrese Maxey this year, who is a lot younger, took that scoring leap. And, again, very similar archetype of players where they're, super fast, switchy guards that are very crafty, are able to get to the rim at ease, high-level shooters, good playmakers. But again, it's just one of those things where availability is your best ability. And I'm not saying that's the case for Darius Garland, but you can see that this injury has really affected him and his ability to kind of be hitting that next level. And again, it's one of those things we're heading into the season. In a way, it's a make or break year for Darius Garland, at least specific to the future for the Cavs. I think his name, like you said, there were times that his name was getting thrown around, maybe in some Laker trade talks, potentially for Orlando in terms of needing a lead point guard. There are some concerns.
I'd be down for Orlando.
And the thing is, I was thinking that prior to the KCP acquisition, where you could have a backcourt of him and Jalen Suggs, where they can kind of,
or even him and KCP.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Suggs, but like contract year. Okay, I mean, Suggs for DG, and we have a DG KCP. Yeah, all right. Again, I'm just a closet Magic fan. Ignore me.
The thing is, I've always said this about the Magic, where I think they're a lead guard scorer away from being they've hit the tier 1 of teams in the East. Because, you can look at guys like Suggs at times where when it's Franz and Paolo, can he take that next leap? And I look at Darius Garland in that same respect, where he's a good player. Can he take that next leap into being a great player? And I think that's where in his All-Star year, he showcased that. They were a team that they went very deep. Again, that was a year where 21.6 points per game. He was shooting 46% from the field, 41% from the three-point line. Again, that was arguably one of his best seasons, where he was also healthy as well. So you can see what he does when he's fully healthy and he has, a full health roster around him. He is a perfect complement to a guy like, Donovan Mitchell, but obviously it doesn't translate to playoff success or winning success. But again, it's one of those things where is he going to be that long-term option in Cleveland as their lead guard alongside a guy like Donovan Mitchell, where, you don't know when it's going to blow up. I feel like this team, if Donovan Mitchell leaves, this team is cooked. If we just have to call a spade again, I'm not confident in the fact that Evan Mobley could take a leap as a number 1 option in the event that Donovan Mitchell leaves, especially when he's a player that he's expressed his frustration at wanting to play high-level playoff basketball. He wants to be on a winning organization.
Well, Donovan Mitchell stay healthy.
That is true. Can he stay healthy as well and also show up when it matters most? I mean, he's shown up in the playoffs, but for himself, in terms of his, his health, there's just a lot of concerns with, this team and their health. Guys like Jared Allen as well. Sometimes Evan Mobley. Can these guys all stay healthy at the same time and be available on the court? And it's just their roster construction. I'm just not a fan of, again, with their defenders. I'm not a fan of Isaac Okoro as a defender. I think he's came into the league and he's been the exact same player, minus him improving his three-point shooting, which I'm going to give him credit for. He's improved as a three-point shooter, but that's really about it. Undersized defender. This is just a oddly constructed team, top to bottom. So again, you've had these concerns with Darius Garland meshing with Sexton. They move off of him. They get a guy like Donovan Mitchell. And I still feel like they're at this peak of being a second round team at best. And does this require them having to move off of Darius Garland to hit their peak? And I don't know. I mean, what does he constitute in the trade market? What does his value come back to? It's not looking good right now. So I think this is an important year for him to really break out, not just as a player, but in terms of into superstar ascension. And again, one of those things where if he doesn't have that year, does he have a long-term future in Cleveland? I'm not so sure, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think with Darius, again, kind of like you said, one way or another, I think Cleveland's got to make a decision by the end of the season where it's okay. Cool. Do we envision Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell being together long term? And I think the answer is a resounding no. So instead of prolonging this, right, and pissing Donovan Mitchell off even more, just rip the Band-Aid off and just trade Darius Garland now. And now again, part of me also understands hey, let's let him rehab his value, let's let him have a full off season, let's see what Kenny can do with this pairing. But I mean, I'm kind of with you, and I think I like Indiana more probably than Cleveland right now. I view Orlando at a very at worst at a very similar level as Cleveland. Miami, I think they're gonna have some regard a bounce back. To what level? Who knows? I don't think Miami's gonna go back to the finals or anything like that, right? But being one of the
conversation of being
Yeah,
like in the playoffs, being a team that
one of the
well.
6-ish best teams in the East. So I don't know. I'm with you. I don't really like the direction that Cleveland's heading in. It's better than being like the worst team on the planet, like they had been post Braun, but now they're like starting to get to the point where they keep going with this core where they're just like hopelessly stuck in the middle. So I don't know. But looking here, we got our nice little graphic set up. We have all the players 25 through 18. This was a long episode, probably the longest episode, since there's a lot of explaining, and this is the video that's going to have the most players in it. But number 25, for a quick recap, Deni Avdija. Number 24, Jaden McDaniels. Number 23, Jalen Suggs. 22, Andrew Nembhard. 21, Dereck Lively. 20, Jalen Green. 19, Keegan Murray. 18, Darius Garland. And next up, we'll have numbers 17 through number 10. That will come in a separate video next week sometime. This was fun. Fun, kind of like really, really hyper focus and hyper analyze on these guys. Mohamed, anything else before we kind of like wrap up here?
Yeah, like you mentioned, this is probably going to be the longest episode, and I think this was probably the part of the list where it kind of is hard to just break the ice and start out with, okay, where is the cutoff for the 25th best player, and then trying to basically figure out why he's the 25th best and why a guy like you mentioned, Jaime Hawkins, Kobe White. There are guys that are in that range that it's hard to kind of get the conversation starting. But I think once we start to hit this next tier of list, this is where the interesting conversations are going to start. I think this is where you're going to do a lot of nitpicking, and we're probably going to have a lot more serious conversations about where we really expect players and what kind of expectations that we have. And I think for guys, in that 25 to 18 range, these are probably the players that have the biggest risk to reward range, where these are the most volatile players. I feel like, these are the guys that probably are the least like solidified in where they're at in terms of, like, again, a guy like Deni Avdija is coming into a new situation. Can he come in and be a guy where he can be a lead option in Portland for a team that, may not have any immediate success in the near future, but he can be a core front of that team for a guy like Jaden McDaniels? Can he take that offensive lead to basically take Minnesota to the next level and kind of be this elite 3-and-D prospect where he's going to have a high-level defense, but can he have the offense that supplements that? Jalen Suggs, obviously, they're established with Paolo and Franz. Can he be that guy where, he can take, obviously, he did take the shooting lead, can he take the offensive creation lead and also just supplement his defensive playmaking and do that on the offensive end and continue to be a high-level playmaker and just a guy that can put the ball on the hoop? Andrew Nembhard, obviously a guy that, probably a year ago we probably wouldn't have mentioned in these conversations, but he's basically solidified himself as one of the best young players in the league. And, where can this Indy team go with, this new formed backcourt of Halliburton and Nembhard? Where can they go? Was it just a one-off opportunity as an outlier, or is Nembhard really true to stay in this Indy team as a forefront, in the East? Dereck Lively, obviously we see what he's done in his rookie season, a lot to love and a lot to want to see better. And, for this Dallas team, can he be that guy that is going to take them to the next level? Obviously, some acquisitions that came in and out with this team. Dereck Lively is going to be the player that, I'm going to need to see a leap from this upcoming season, both on the offensive and defensive end, improving his frame. Could they run it back 100% with the skill set that they have and the new acquisitions? Going to be interesting. And another interesting as well is this Jalen Green. Just how I feel about Jalen Green. I think a player where he is so volatile in terms of his scoring and his potential, but what he is on his highs, but on his lows, it's not the best. And again, we hold this guy in such high regard as a top 3 pick in his class. Special player when he's on. And I think this is truly the year where he has to break out, or the Rockets are just, I think, cutting their ties off in terms of making him the franchise player. And, kind of these, like you mentioned, with the contract situation, is he going to be the guy that gets that rookie max? Is it from them? Is it from somebody else? Who knows? But again, a lot to like from Jalen, but a lot that's left desired for him. So something that we want to see in this upcoming year. And another thing that we want to see is for, the player 19 with Keegan Murray, increased, shooting and, volume in terms of his shooting, scoring, also his production. But, he did take hits in his metrics, obviously with the acquisition of DeMar DeRozan, Devin Carter in the draft, you're adding a lot more shooters and a lot more guys in rotation that are going to be very viable options offensively. How does that affect Keegan Murray? And is he still going to be finding a way to be effective on the offensive end outside of being an off-ball threat? That's where I really want to be able to see his growth, but he's already done that, as a defender. And, in terms of improving his playmaking and getting to the rim, like you mentioned, where can he take that next leap, in a lesser usage or in a lesser role? And then obviously with Darius Garland, I mean, this is a player that, we raved about how skillful he is as an offensive player, special talent, like you said, one of the craftiest, best handles in the league. But, we've had these conversations time in and out about where can he take that next step and when can it be? And, are the Cavs done waiting for that to come? When they have a guy like Donovan Mitchell, that's a win now player, with his skill set, can you pair that alongside like a guy like Darius Garland? We've seen that in the past. It hasn't worked. When is it going to succumb to actual results? We may not know. We've seen his name be thrown around in trade rumors. But is this the year that we actually do see Darius Garland break into being a real lead superstar guard? Who knows? But again, that was 18 through 25. That was the beauty of this list. A lot of special names to come forth, a lot more serious names and a lot more interesting ones that are going to probably lead to a lot more interesting conversations about where we stand about the player and, in their current moment in the league. So this was a super fun episode. I really love doing things like this because, it just gives us perspective on how we talk about players in the league, how we view guys very similarly, very differently. And I think this next set of players is where we probably have the biggest range of differences in terms of how we feel about the player, where we rank them. And there's probably going to be the biggest variance in that list. So I think that's going to be the fun, stating my case why I feel X, Y, Z is better. You may state your case, but again, that's the beauty of this list. And I'm super excited, man. Love making the content.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a ton of fun. Make sure you guys go follow all of Mohamed's work. I'll make sure I include his Twitter link down below. And we will be seeing a ton of stuff from Mohamed this upcoming season. I'm incredibly excited for it. Make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. A bunch of content on the way. You guys will have just seen number 23 in my power rankings, the Charlotte Hornets. Number 22, depending on when this drops, would have either dropped already as well or is dropping today or tomorrow. So make sure you guys subscribe if you are new as well. Till next, everybody. See ya. Stay safe and peace out.
Peace.